Excuse me, Your Worship, we're live.
All right, and I think we have all council members here. So I will call the meeting to order for the Strategic Initiatives Standing Committee, a meeting for November 1, 2021. Hope everyone had a fun Halloween last night. And so I will look to Councillor Mccloud to please read the land acknowledgement.
For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who cared for their families and communities the way we now seek to care for ours. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and respects all the nation-to-nation agreements that have formed relationships with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island, the reality of our shared history, the current contributions of Indigenous peoples within our community, and seeks to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better, to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll look for a motion to adopt the agenda. The resolution reads that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for November 1, 2021 be adopted as presented. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Madigan, Councillor Berman. Any corrections or additions, Council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations today? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. With respect to the staff report 7.4 on non-union and council compensation review, under the code of conduct, I have an immediate family member who is working permanent part-time under the non-union. And so when we get to that agenda item, I declare my conflict and I'll recuse myself, but specifically from the permanent part-time.
Good, thank you very much. Any other declarations today? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that position as we progress through the agenda, please let us know. And that brings us then to item 4, deputations. And item 4.1, we have the Affordable Housing Task Force final report. And I am going to ask that Chair Nancy Esson be brought forward into the meeting. And I will ask her then to start her deputation and introduce her board members, task force members.
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have a number of our task force members that are here present today that will also be admitting into the meeting at this point.
Okay, good. Thank you, Sarah. And I'll ask Chair Esson to introduce her subcommittee chairs and those that will be presenting today. So I know you've been very hard at work, Nancy, and we look forward to hearing the final report from your committee members. And I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Council, for the opportunity to present this summary of our full report and recommendations that are attached in the agenda package. I'm Nancy Esson, and I had the opportunity, great opportunity, I should say, to chair this task force for the past 7 months. And here's an overview of our presentation for today. Will you put the slides up, Sarah? So we're now at slide number 3. Most importantly, I'd like to take a minute to recognize our team on the Affordable Housing Task Force and thank them for the dedication and commitment in helping put together these well thought out and detailed recommendations for Council's consideration. Starting with Marg, Scheben, Edey, Vice Chair and Chair of the Property Subcommittee, Doug Linton, Member and Chair of the Policy and Procedures Committee, Doug Vanderkooy, Member and Chair, Funding Grant Social Finance Subcommittee, and the members, Kelly Caldwell, Gail Michelangelo, Jane Walker, Council members, Deputy Mayor Keith Hall, and Councillors Kathy Jeffrey and Yvonne Hamlin. We had also some former members who were contributors, Robert Voigt, Steffi Williams, and Kira Legier. And we'd also like to thank our staff the town staff who helped with our meetings and were great contributors. Planner Nathan Mukash, Clerk Sarah Almos, and Committee Coordinator Stephanie Hochran. And I'd just like to say also that this group of volunteers are extremely dedicated. They've taken a deep dive into the subject matter of affordable housing in our town, and they're passionate about it. And the people on this committee have met 1 to 3 times per week for approximately 1 to 3 hours per meeting for the past 7 months. So we also invited many subject matter experts to join and present to the task force. So on slide number 4, which is where we are right now, firstly, for the benefit of council and for the public, we'd like to quickly review the mandate our task force was given by council. It's broken down into 4 focus areas. The first was to make recommendations on the future of the Johnson Trust Apartments on Birch Street. The second was to provide recommendations to local planning policies to increase affordable housing options. The third, to explore and make recommendations regarding grant funding opportunities for affordable housing development. And the fourth and final mandate was to provide support for an action plan for Collingwood's commitment to the UN Sustainability Goal number 11 that pertains to safe and affordable housing. I'll now pass over to Gail Michaelenko to discuss why it matters.
Good afternoon, Council. As most of you know, my name is Gail Michaelenko, and I would like to share the Why It Matters overview. There are a lot of reasons, as you can see on this slide, of the negative impacts that can contribute to the lack of affordable housing, safe and secure housing in a community, and the positive impact of having adequate affordable housing. As identified in the report prepared by the Simcoe County Alliance to End Homelessness Regional Task Force, there are many negative impacts, including economic, social, and health-related impacts, some of which may not necessarily fall within council's jurisdiction, but there are many reasons why it matters, such as economic impacts. Residents with high housing costs will have less discretionary money to spend on goods and services. That means less money being spent on local businesses and less opportunity for business growth. Loss of labor force and inability to attract new labor force. Loss of businesses due to high rents and labor force costs. The economic sustainability through labor force sustainability is improved. Under social and health impacts, the positive impacts of adequate affordable housing are so important for healthy, sustainable communities because it improves and supports community well-being and vibrancy. It reduces the incidence of homelessness. It improves health, reducing strain on health and social services. It supports population diversity and equity. It reduces crime rates. Further to the economic, social, and health impacts, there are other reasons it is critical the town of Collingwood take a leading role in the local housing crisis. By ensuring appropriate planning and building controls are in place to increase housing options and integration, by establishing financial incentives and support, by advocating to upper levels of government, and by establishing necessary bylaws and policies to support housing affordability, they can correct the current housing crisis our community is facing. The Municipal Act provides the authority to put in place any service or anything that the municipality considers necessary or desirable for the public with respect to the economic, social, and well-being of the community and well-being of persons, including consumer protection. Our community-based strategic plan goal is to support and manage growth and prosperity and enhance community safety and well-being. It speaks to weaknesses and threats, including the lack of affordable housing that could result in an economic downturn for this community. Our recently approved Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan describes housing as one of the 8 risks, identifying a commitment to address housing that is affordable and attainable. And lastly, the Municipal Economic Development Action Plan identifies affordable housing as an essential for sustainable growth and the affordability crisis as a barrier to economic growth. It also states the need for attainable accommodation with a broader long-term housing strategy informed by the Housing Options Official Plan Update discussion paper published in July 2020. Thank you.
As we look at the insight and data, as part of the work on the task force, it became evident that we needed to access to professional advice and data collection. And we're grateful to have council's support to retain the services of NBLC consultants this summer. Nick Michael, partner at NBLC, will be presenting the next slides that are formulated, sorry. Our insights and data that was required for the task force to prepare the best recommendations possible for council's consideration.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here today to present some of the findings from the housing and affordable needs assessment I completed with this task force. And I just wanted to get out of the way, what a great job they've done putting this work together. It was just a fantastic experience to work with them on this really important topic. And, there's really a lot of work here that they've really competently put together. So, big congratulations to them. But, my role here today was really just to put a little bit of a finer point on what's happening in the real estate market, identifying the types of households that, are struggling to afford a home, and of course, pinpointing where the most obvious affordable housing and just housing gaps in general are observed in the municipality. Next slide, please. So, to begin, I think it's really important to define what we mean when we discuss affordable housing, because of course, affordability is relative. Certain housing types, may be affordable to some, but absolutely are not to others. So the provincial policy statement gives us a little bit of guidance here, and they define affordability as housing for which the shelter costs, so rent or your mortgage, does not exceed 30% of a household's gross annual income. And generally, housing analysts like myself, we really like to define and identify the affordability needs of low and moderate income households. So what we do is we collect and sort income data in municipality into decile groups. And we generally define low income as those earning in the bottom 30th percent of all households, so the third income decile, with moderate income households being those earning between, generally the third and sixth income decile. Next slide, please. And focusing in on incomes here, we do generally see that incomes in Collingwood are increasing. They increased by around 20% on average between 2006 and 2016. But also what we're seeing is that the vast majority of that growth is occurring for those earning over $100,000 per year. You can see the gray bar increasing significantly over the orange and blue bars there for the $100,000 group. So these are your high income earners. The lowest income groups in Collingwood have actually remained fairly stable over these 10 years. So housing is definitely getting more expensive, as we'll see, and as you know, but the ability for most to afford that increase is limited and driven by the growth of high income earners. Next slide, please. And when we look at the income deciles in the town for owners and renters, we see a few things right away. First, renters are earning much less than owners on average, but also consistently across each income decile, which is, of course, probably something you would expect to see. It's not unusual from my perspective. Do a lot of this work across the province. Those who own their home, they tend to earn more than renter households. And for the most part, owners are earning about twice as much as renters. We're also seeing that the income of owners is increasing much quicker than rental households, especially at the lower income spectrum. So this illustrates right away the income disparity between owners and renters in Collingwood. Next slide. And what we've done here on the screen is we've taken the income data from the 2016 census and inflated these numbers to an estimate of what they might be in 2021 using the Consumer Price Index. And I'll admit that, this is a common approach. We do this a lot, others do it a lot, but it's not perfect because it doesn't account for new households and their incomes who may have moved to Collingwood between 2016 and 2021. We're simply inflating the 2016 data based on inflation. We're going to need the new census data to be released later this year, probably into next year, to understand how socioeconomic variables are actually switching, but it's a useful measure for today's exercise. So hopefully next year we'll be able to tap into that new census data. Next slide, please. But using this data, here we have the rents and purchase price each of these income deciles could afford to pay for a home based on the 30% rule I noted earlier. And for rental households, low-income earners may only be able to afford a monthly rent of between $400 and $700 a month, whereas moderate income households might be able to afford $900 to $1,300 per month. And the column to the right illustrates the affordability thresholds for owner households. So these low-income groups might be able to purchase a home valued between $83,000 and $190,000, with moderate income potentially being able to afford a home between $250,000 and $390,000. Next slide, please. So now I want to take a quick look at the housing options that are available to these households, but I'm sure you can imagine there's probably not a lot of housing options that are available at those price points I just noted. Next slide. So let's begin by looking at the ownership market. What we're seeing is rapid price appreciation in the resale market, with these homes increasing on average by between 40 and 60% over the past year. Really rapid and aggressive price escalation across everything from single family homes, townhomes, condo apartments. We're also seeing immense demand for homes even at these high prices, with homes selling on average in about a week over the past year. Whereas in 2016, and true even of last year, we used to see homes take closer to a month to sell on average. So overall, Collingwood did typically used to be, a relatively balanced market where price appreciation and demand was pretty modest. We're now seeing rapid price escalation, quick sales, and virtually no inventory. This is all telling us that the supply of housing in the municipality is just simply not meeting demand. And this is true not just in Collingwood, but Central Ontario more broadly, with many calling this current time a housing crisis. Of course, the new housing market, so new construction, it's even more expensive than the metrics I have on the screen. And we document that in our larger report, which was made available to you. Next slide, please. Moving to the rental market now, what we're seeing is that rents have been increasing steadily since 1990, but the rate of increase has been significantly higher over the past 5 years, where rents have increased by an annual average of 5% since 2016, compared to only 3% since 1990. So really, we're seeing similar things to the ownership market over the past few years. Excuse me. And we're also seeing very tight vacancy, which has been below balanced conditions for over a decade. We do see a little bit of an uptick in the last year, but this was observed generally across the province during the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. Another thing we see is that the rental market is very small in Collingwood, consisting of less than 600 units as of 2020. So this small rental universe also likely explains, the somewhat spiky vacancy rate that we saw on the last page in those graphs, because any small movement in the number of vacant units will have a higher proportional impact on the overall vacancy rate, right? If we think about rental universes in Toronto and others that are in the tens and hundreds of thousands. But what we're seeing is that demand is clearly increasing for rental apartments, evidenced by low vacancy and rising rents, which is only expected to increase looking forward, as I'll highlight in just a second. But despite this, the town has actually been losing rental apartments fairly consistently across over the past 30 years. And despite some recent investment in rental housing and some development that's currently under construction, Collingwood has experienced a net loss of nearly 200 rental apartments since 1990. With the vast majority being two-bedroom units. Next slide, please. So what we've done here in these charts is we've taken the affordability thresholds by decile group that I identified earlier, and I'm comparing that to what these groups could afford to pay relative to the actual cost of housing in the municipality. And what we see here is most homes and rental apartments are unaffordable to households earning below the 7th income decile. So all low-income households cannot afford to purchase a home or rent an apartment at market pricing. Similarly, all moderate income households cannot afford to purchase a home, and most moderate income households cannot afford to rent an apartment, perhaps aside from a very small number of bachelor apartments that are out there, as well as looking to sharing a unit with someone. So while we may have expected to see, significant challenges for low-income groups, we're now starting to see these issues creep into the moderate income groups as well, which should concern all of us. We're seeing similar issues right across major Ontario markets right now. Next slide. So to conclude, I just wanted to touch on the characteristics of households that are facing affordability challenges before wrapping up. Let's move on to the next slide. So CMHC has done, a really excellent analysis identifying those who are in core housing need based on data provided through the census. And what this data does is it tells us when a household is spending more than 30% of their income on housing, if they're living in a home that's not fit for occupancy, in other words, the home requires significant repairs, or if they're living in a home that's just not suitable to their needs, right? And this is situations where, a family of 5 might be living in a 2-bedroom apartment. If you meet any of those tests, you're noted to be in core housing need. And what we see here, which shouldn't be surprising given the income discrepancy between these two groups, but renters are 3 times as likely to experience core housing need than owner households. Nearly 40% of all renter households in your municipality are in core housing need. And as you can see at the bottom graph there, the vast majority is due to the affordability test, meaning these groups are not able to afford the rent that they're currently paying. This is a very important metric that should influence any policy outcome or strategy to address affordability that you think about today. Next slide. And when we look at the characteristics of the households that are in core housing need, we see these are typically vulnerable populations. Everyone from seniors, lone parents, lower income groups with children, recent immigrants, and households with activity limitations. Of note, we're also starting to see affordability challenges grow for younger people, likely because of a lack of rental housing supply and eroding affordability in the market. Next slide. So in conclusion, what we're seeing is that, much of the housing in Collingwood is unaffordable to a wide range of households in the municipality, with low and moderate income groups being priced out of the vast majority of options that are available to them. For ownership housing, this is likely due to migration from other parts of Ontario, especially as higher income individuals continue to move to Collingwood, which appears to be occurring at a much higher rate than previous years, as well as general supply-demand gaps that we touched in our larger report. But for rental housing, the affordability challenges are quite easy to diagnose. You have a growing population, and as ownership housing continues to get more expensive, many would-be purchasers are turning to the rental market. Both of these factors are driving increased demand for rental apartments, driving price growth and limiting availability, while at the same time your rental market has experienced a net loss of housing over the past 30 years, with only modest investment currently underway. This is why affordability is worsening, and why all of the affordability metrics I'm noting are far worse for renter households than for owners. We also see unaffordable rental housing being one of the primary factors attributed to a growing homeless population, as well as individuals just struggling to get by and live comfortably. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I know I might have exceeded my time limit, but overall, what we're seeing is just affordability challenges across the housing continuum, but more prevalently observed in the rental market. So we're strongly recommending that you begin considering strategies to improve the supply of both market and affordable rental housing, investigate affordable ownership opportunities with nonprofit groups, assess all opportunities to allow market housing to adequately respond to demand, and other similar considerations that members of the task force will now walk you through. Thank you again for having me today.
As we move forward with the Affordable Housing Task Force recommendations, We'd like to break down our recommendations within the report based on the 4 mandates required, as well as other critical recommendations that the task force feel are extremely important to keeping affordable housing on the forefront in Collingwood. The recommendations will be presented by each of the 3 subcommittees chairs and broken down into priority, responsibilities, and budget implications. And now I'd like to introduce Marg Scheben, Edey, Vice Chair of the Affordable Housing Task Force and Chair of the Property Subcommittee.
Thank you, Nancy. So we took a deep dive into these 2 properties that are owned by the town. The buildings have passed really passed their life. And so there are various different options that we had to look at. You know, should they be torn down? Should they be redeveloped, renovated, left as they are, sold? There's always many options on the table. And so we looked into all of those options, consulted with various different stakeholders. And in the end, our recommendation on those properties is that they should be retained in town ownership and redeveloped for a possible mixed-use development. This would include an appropriate mix of affordable units, so talking about that 30th to 60th income deciles, and market rent units, which some number of those are likely essential in order to make it operationally feasible. We also think that there would be value in investigating the option of acquiring additional adjoining properties to create a larger parcel for redevelopment. For example, depending on the outcome of the new official plan, there might be an opportunity to do something rather innovative to the north of the property that could then scale as the property moves south into the residential neighborhood. But regardless, with or without additional properties, we feel it's important to start the process of creating a plan for redevelopment on that site. We think it's critical that that be done in consultation with the neighbors, as well as other interested stakeholders, to make sure that we can achieve maximum densities, but that are also compatible with and transition into the neighborhood context. We kind of envision that it would be a project that's so fantastic that any of the neighbors themselves would love to live there. Any development should meet as a minimum the criteria that we've set out as what we think are ideal in supporting UN goal number 11, and that discussion is coming up. Next slide, please. We also know that it's going to be a challenge to comfortably relocate the existing tenants that are at that property. And so just a sidebar recommendation that the process of relocation should take place at least a year before the possible commencement of any construction, and that the county should be brought into that process, as well as obtaining the legal advice. We also think that there's some options around what to do with it once it's redeveloped. So the town has the option of developing and subsequently managing the property itself, or looking at turning it over to another not-for-profit entity, all of which we've looked into. For example, community land trusts, municipal service corporations, housing cooperatives, and interesting blends of both. Depending on the goals of the community, it's best at that stage, when those goals are clearly identified, to consult with a lawyer specializing in each of these to guide what the best options are moving forward, considering things like liability and tenure and the process to get there. Next slide. Outside of the Birch Street properties, our subcommittee went a little bit farther, and we reviewed all town-owned properties, and we did identify some as being suitable for future development of affordable housing, and would like to explore those further with council in an in-camera meeting, because there would be some discussion about designating them in the new official plan in the future for residential apartment built form with mixed uses, including commercial and community facilities. And further, we feel that the properties we've identified should be held in town ownership, so essentially land banked for future projects. We also recognize that there is a critical need to move quickly, and neither the Birch Street properties or any of the town-owned properties are currently zoned and suitable for immediate development. So we're also recommending that the municipality acquire a property that is currently zoned, suitable for immediate development, and begin the process, the development process, immediately. Thank you. Over to Doug.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Linton. I am the chair of the Policy and Process Subcommittee, dealing with the task of making recommendations around local planning policies and ways to increase affordable housing options. Each one of the recommendations made by the Policy and Process Subcommittee are concrete, actionable, and proven as viable means of supporting affordable housing options in the community. Now, we've broken down our very many recommendations into 5 categories that fit within the mandate that was given to us. In consideration of time constraints, instead of simply reading through each of these recommendations, I'm going to summarize the categories. Slides 28 and 29, these next 2 slides, are all regarding official plan and zoning bylaw recommendations. So these include various policies such as encouraging broader ranges of housing type and mixed use buildings, policies to simplify and to speed up development, policies incorporating creative solutions to density and parking issues. So those are all within slides 28 and 29. If you could move to slide 30, please. This category of recommendations all revolve around the increasing of the housing supply. So these include policies to ensure broader permissions for things like rooming houses, dealing with the short-term rental situation within the municipality, and then other items such as incentivizing commercial property owners to renovate and rehabilitate downtown properties with potential living space, residential space above their commercial space. Next slide, please. These are 2 recommendations. The first category being the vision for surplus town lands, and it's very simple. We're recommending that you simply prioritize these surplus town lands for affordable housing projects. But in addition, we also recommend that you encourage the boards of education who may also own lands that might become surplus in the future to do the same by some capacity. Under the category of retention of affordable housing, we're losing affordable housing at a blistering pace in our community. And a rental replacement bylaw, as instituted quite successfully by other municipalities, by instituting that bylaw, will begin to tackle this problem. Next slide, please. Under the accessory units and secondary suites, which we're considering as a subcategory of increasing housing supply, this is with the recognition that probably the most effective and the fastest way to increase rental stock within the municipality is to support secondary suites. And we've spent a fair bit of time on this. It's very concrete. Recommendations such as harmonizing our official plan and our zoning bylaw with the section of the Planning Act to allow an apartment in the main dwelling and a detached accessory unit in the backyard, for example. The creation of a layman's guide to accessory apartments and to make the make the process of inspection and approval easier to understand, and honestly to try to deal with what has been described as a culture of negativity within some of the municipal departments around the development of accessory suites. Streamlining the process and supporting homeowners to create legal units. So there's a lot to digest within these 5 categories, and I'll leave you all to digest them at your own rate. Next slide, please. And one more, please. However, equally important to these specific recommendations are those identified under this slide as other critical recommendations, and I'd like to briefly expand on some of these. Within this very first one, as you can see, it's a very comprehensive recommendation, but there are 2 really important key points, I think, in this. 1, the development of a Collingwood housing charter, formally recognizing housing as a fundamental human right. And by doing so, we begin to change the way we view housing. We begin to change the way we think about housing and the way we make decisions about future growth and the development within our community. 2, the creation of a staff position within the planning department, a dedicated housing planning specialist to begin the very challenging process of developing and then instituting a comprehensive housing strategy, and to undertake the kinds of responsibilities and roles, many of which are detailed in this recommendation. Next slide, please. 3, establish an affordable housing advisory committee made up of citizens and stakeholders, some with lived experience, representation from the development community, and if they'll agree, representation from the county council. 4, establish a municipal not-for-profit housing corporation, or see if there's an opportunity to partner with an existing not-for-profit group that has the capacity to develop affordable housing projects. The recommendations found in this report are far-reaching and substantive in their potential impact. They require bold action to achieve the outcome that we're all hoping for. We acknowledge, by virtue of the fact that the task force was struck by unanimous will of the council, that you appreciate the gravity and the seriousness of the crisis that we're facing. I'd like to thank you very much for striking the Affordable Housing Task Force and for allowing me to participate. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and my name is Jack Vanderkooy, and together with Jane Walker, Gail Mccloud, and Councillor Kathy Jeffrey, we basically did the research on grants and funding that's available to support and encourage the development of affordable housing in our community. Grants and incentives are generally available at all levels of government, federal, provincial, and regional. And sadly, at the municipal level, there isn't a lot. And so our recommendations are specifically geared towards what municipalities can do to promote the affordable housing component, and not only to create more affordable housing, but also to have a vision, to understand what the long-term benefits are. And like any financing that a municipality engages in, it's an investment and into the economic well-being of our community. So the first recommendation is to establish an affordable housing reserve fund. And we would be recommending that initial funding for this would be 1% of tax revenues. That would be currently about $350,000. And that would be included in the 2022 and subsequent budgets. In addition, we would recommend that any surpluses, any annual surpluses would be channeled into this reserve fund. And it's, again, the ability to create a fund to promote more affordable housing, to hire the necessary staff, and to provide the necessary incentives. Our second recommendation would be to use a portion of the proceeds of the utility in the airport to purchase land, and to be held in trust, preferably a land trust, specifically designed for affordable housing. The town owns several parcels of land, and we're also recommending that these be placed in a land trust where possible. Our third recommendation is to raise the awareness of available funding opportunities through CMHC and other federal, provincial, and regional programs. Our task force has compiled a table of what funds are available and under what conditions. And we were quite surprised at how much is available and how this is a collaborative effort to increase affordable housing, not only in our municipalities, but right across the province and our country. We do need collaboration from all levels of government, plus the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, the co-op sector, including all of our communities. Can I get the next slide, please? One of the challenges that social finance offerings have is to provide security to protect the investors. So we are recommending that the town collaborates with not-for-profit housing or co-op providers to provide first loss guarantees so that they can utilize community investment bonds to fund a project. And this basically ensures that you get greater community engagement and buy-in with minimal budget implications. And then to assist in the development of more affordable housing, we're recommending the deferral of development charges, exemption of property taxes, and waiver of building permit fees. And these, of course, would only be available as long as the development remains affordable, preferably into perpetuity. Next slide, please. And finally, if community benefit charges are employed in Collingwood, we recommend that affordable housing be identified as one of those benefits. This is really important because it then speaks to the vision of our council and of our leaders to provide affordable housing in our community. So our report provides much more detail, but we are asking that our council seriously considers what financial incentives can be provided and not look at them necessarily as a cost, but rather as an investment to create a healthy, sustainable, and inclusive community with economic benefits for everyone. Thank you very much. It's been a real privilege to be on this group. It's a great group of people. One day we're going to actually meet in person, and we certainly look forward to that. But thank you, Council, for having the vision and the foresight to establish this task force. And I feel a real privilege just to have been a part of it. Thank you very much.
I think, Jane, are you there? I think you're next with the UN sustainability goals. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. I don't think I'm on though. I don't think I can, I'm on the screen. Oh, well. Okay. Good afternoon, Council. My name is Jane Walker and I'm a member on this, wait a second, start my video. Sorry about this. I'm on the task force and we put together this report that helps us remain connected with and provide support for an action plan for Council regarding Collingwood's commitment to the United Nations Sustainability Goal number 11 pertaining to inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable towns and affordable housing. The task force has developed a fulsome specific set of criteria when considering or partnering with any initiatives or projects pertaining to affordable housing, as well as the respective principles. I'm not going to review the entire list, but rather review some of the key recommendations. First, focus on supplying units to local workforce based on incomes in the 30th to 60th percentile, or 25,000 to 47,000 a year income, and include a percentage of deeply affordable units in each development if county or other appropriate support is available. Any development involving public funds, incentives, or land must include permanent security of tenure and be priced affordably in perpetuity. Projects must be built sustainably and ideally to a net zero substandard. So we have a real opportunity here to be innovative and think outside the box. There needs to be a range of unit sizes geared at varied demographics, and designs must incorporate accessible universal design. Mixed-use developments are desirable to allow for community spaces, social and/or private enterprises. Food insecurity and childcare are important as they are both a cause and byproduct of affordable housing issues. Prioritize incorporating these into a mixed-use development through either private or social enterprises. Cheaper is not better. It is not less expensive in the long run. Rental housing must encompass quality that is built to last. Noise and vibrations are the most common problem in poorly built buildings and must be addressed. Building a sense of community and incorporating green spaces is important. Involving neighbors and other relevant stakeholders early on in the process, from visioning, zoning to design. And finally, build near transit routes and minimize parking requirements. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone, again. So I know that there's an awful lot here for you to digest. I think there's something like 53 recommendations and lots of data and a more comprehensive report behind that. So I would just like to summarize a couple of the key takeaways of our message to you today. We realize that as the town is continuing to grow, these affordability challenges are also going to continue to grow. I'd also like to mention that a lot of the data that you've seen actually comes from 2015 because they were from the 2016 census. And things have certainly got worse since that time. As Nick pointed out, we have somewhere around 1,700 households. That's not individuals, that's households in the community and core housing need. I would certainly hazard a guess that that number is far too low, given what has happened in both the rental and ownership universe in the last couple of years. Based on the forecasts to 2031, that number is certainly going to increase. Overall, as Nick said, the demand for housing is outpacing our housing supply, and the gap and the greatest need is in the rental sector. I think one of the really important points that I certainly was not aware of before is that if you look at the average incomes of Collingwood, it's not really very fair. If you break it down and say the average incomes, household incomes of homeowners versus the average household income of renters, renters are approximately 50% of the income levels of homeowners. So it's a substantial difference and certainly changes the approach and changed the recommendations that we made. Supply, as Doug had mentioned, has dramatically eroded in recent years. Sorry, apologize. My notes just kind of got away from me. Supply has dramatically eroded in recent years as property sales have been so high, tenants have been displaced as new residents have purchased the homes. We've had certainly gentrification in our community, rent evictions, property conversions. And in fact, a study done out of Ottawa suggested that in Canada, we're losing affordable housing units at a rate of 7 to 1. And if we look at the numbers in Collingwood of the number of new apartments that have been created in the last decade, or even go back farther, 2 decades, versus the number we've lost, it would, as Doug said, certainly appear we are losing them at a blistering rate. So you can't only think about what new do we have to create, how do we make up for what we're losing, or how do we stop the tap of that kind of loss? The economic impacts, as Gail talked about and as Nick talked about, as are mentioned in the Economic Development Action Plan, are very key to our community's future sustainable growth. We've all already seen in the last few months, businesses, big businesses in town that have closed on weekends due to staff shortages, other ones who've reduced hours, other ones who have closed, and other ones who have relocated. So the impact on our business community has already been a challenge and will only continue to grow. As a sidebar, I think about a new hospital and how many more healthcare workers we will have to attract to the community, and will they be able to afford to live here? So the affordability crisis is a barrier to economic growth. And as was mentioned by Jack, any money that council spends on this issue isn't an expenditure, it's an investment in our sustainable future. It's also imperative that the town looks at, just in general, increasing the supply of rental housing, regardless of what decile it falls into, because we're seeing challenges in every decile. And the more housing that there is, the more choice and availability there would be in the market. You know, we know that every single person in the community is affected by this issue, whether they realize it or not. A community that can't afford or cannot meet its labor force needs is not sustainable. High housing costs mean people are suffering impacts to their physical and mental health. Crime rates increase, and people are forced to live in substandard or overcrowded living conditions. People who are spending a disproportionate share of their income on housing have no money left over at the end of the day to shop local, to eat out local, to buy a piece of art or attend a show, all of which impact all of us. Affordable housing is a root issue that is affecting our future. The good news is we can do something about it. It starts with you as our town leadership. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. We need to be bold, innovative, take chances, seek expertise. Because if we don't do it now, when would we do it? We need measurable goals and concrete action plans, all of which are reflected in our 53 recommendations here today. In addition, I have to add that we have to turn to the public to think about this issue. NIMBYism is a rampant problem across Canada and gaining attention. And the public needs to stop and think about, what kind of community did they want to live in? Do they want to live in a community that is prosperous with a sustainable future, that they can be proud to live in, where they work together with their neighbors and share in our resources? The public needs to take time to learn about and understand this issue and passionately champion the creation of affordable housing. As a community, we can design our future, and you as a council can lead by example and give us a community that gets it and does it right. Thank you.
The Affordable Housing Committee Task Force appreciates the recommendations are detailed and require additional staff and external expertise to thoroughly evaluate the costs, program impacts, and integration in the full departmental and corporate objectives of the municipality. The following council actionable steps are recommended as identified in your agenda today. And to that end, here are the next 7 steps that we recommend. Recommendation that council direct recommendations contained within the report be referred to staff for their review and evaluations within 3 months. That number 1, that council direct the recommendations regarding the future of the Johnson Trust Apartments be referred to staff to further investigate and develop an appropriate strategy for its development at the existing site with a potential mixed use commercial with a focus on market and affordable rental units within 30 to 60th tenant income decile for council's consideration within the next 6 months. Number 2, that council directs staff to include the request to establish a reserve fund and a land trust in the 2022 budget deliberations. Number 3, that council direct all recommendations pertaining to the official plan and zoning bylaws to be referred immediately to staff and consultants for review and evaluation in new updates being considered by council. Number 4, that council support in principle the proposed vision with respect to any future initiatives that pertains to the UN Sustainability Goal number 11 and affordable housing. Number 5, that council include in the 2022 budget the hiring of an affordable housing planning specialist. Number 6, and further that council immediately establish an affordable housing advisory committee to advise and assist where appropriate with the recommendations contained within this report, and the mandate of the existing task force be extended to during this transition. And number 7, and further that council refer to the other critical recommendations to staff for review and report back to council within 3 months on the timelines for consideration and implementation. And I think we all understand here that there's no magic bullet or one solution to solve this very complex problem. The solution lies in collaboration between all levels of government and the not-for-profit sector and the private developers and builders. If we want to improve our housing crisis, we need to lead by example and take action immediately. On behalf of the Affordable Housing Task Force, I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to bring forward these recommendations and being part of the solution. We're available to answer any questions that the public or council may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Esson and Vice Chair Scheben, and members Linton, Vanderkooy, Caldwell, Michalko, Walker, as well as our council members, Deputy Mayor Hall, Councillors Jeffrey and Hamlin, and to the members that have started but were unable to complete. Everybody's contribution was very much appreciated. We've certainly seen in the last 18 to 20 months this problem be exacerbated by the pandemic, and we know we have our work cut out for us. So we thank you for starting this lengthy process and for lending your expertise, experience, and time and commitment to pushing this forward. And with that, I will look to Clerk Almas to see if there are any members of the public that would like to speak to this item. Sarah?
Thank you, Your Worship. I know we have a number of individuals likely wishing to speak. If you are on a telephone, please press the *9 to raise your hand and we will unmute you. And if you are on computer or smartphone, you'd like to press the raise your hand feature, we'll let you in by order that are received. And our first individual is participating by telephone. So we will unmute her. I believe it's Miss Marlene Grant. And to speak, please press *6 to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon, Ms. Grant. Go ahead.
Thanks. I live at 30 Birch Street for the last 15 years. That's directly across from Johnson Trust Apartments. I'd like you to wait until I'm done and then you could ask me questions or answer the questions at the end. In regards to the Johnson Trust Apartments, is this property the sole area to be redeveloped, or are you still trying to acquire other properties to the north of the Johnson Apartments? Example, Chris Dodd, 3 properties, also tenement buildings on First Street that you have tried to acquire. Is the Johnson project only the first phase of a much larger development? A lot of people, residents here, would like to have this kind of information because we too have to make different probably decisions in if we're going to stay in our homes and how big this project is going to be. How can you determine the first phase of what the density, height, and number of units is to be built if you don't have a full plan of the future phases? A 2-story building would be preferable there. That would provide housing for 30 families. It's not that big of an area there. It isn't like some other ones that have acres or even large amounts and not downtown outside of the city. There are already 8 families living there now, but a large section of the building is only 1 story. 2 stories would fit into the existing neighborhood very well. If a 3-story building is built and the first floor is to be used for coffee shops and other street-level businesses, this will prove ridiculous. It will be an added height to that building that isn't needed because of the proximity of this building to all the facilities that are needed in the downtown area. And more importantly, the purpose of this building is housing, not commercial enterprise occupying the needed space. All of the residents are concerned about the structural damage to our homes with this construction proceeding. Increased traffic noise. It's already very busy on this street. Light from the headlights, noise pollution, speed limits, where the entrance exits would be, and the impact on other residents directly opposite them. The whole construction ordeal, actually. Parking, snow removal issues. The main issue is the reduced value of our homes. While we're still going to be paying the same taxes, property taxes. The loss of privacy, this is really a large one too. This is really important for the size of the unit that's going to be built. A multi-story building would tower over the current homes. The views from the building will be directly into the backyards of the neighbors. Fences and trees would not be sufficient to maintain the current level of privacy, which is a hallmark of the Tree Street neighborhood. If the town chooses a municipal corporation or a private developer, do they follow the guidelines set out by the council, or do they make their own decisions in respect to height, capacity of the building? Is a third party being farmed out for the management of the new establishment? Any recommendations for the redevelopment of the lands for housing purposes should be geared to lower middle income families and seniors. The council has so far not shown us that this is not going to become a social housing project. Using examples that are not comparable to our situation has no value, like Lucy's house in Barrie is a one-story 18-unit building, and it's not downtown. It's out at 170 Essa Road. Likewise, with the lighthouse in Aurelia, that's on 75 Queen Street. It's also a one-story, not downtown in a residential area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grant. And today we're receiving the recommendations from our task force and we're referring it to staff. And so your concerns will be looked at, and any development will be required to comply with our planning and zoning bylaws. So thank you for those comments.
Thank you.
Sarah, is there anyone else who would like to address council?
Yes,
or
Your
the
Worship.
task force?
Yes, Your Worship. We have Helen Bull. And Helen may need to unmute herself.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you, Helen.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Almos, did you receive an envelope this morning with my petitions?
Thank you, Ms. Bull. Yes, we have received them and we have circulated them to all of council as well today.
Thank you. There's one more pending, but she was out of town. So I have close to 50 petitions. Members of council and Strategic Initiative Task Force and staff. I am here, my name is Helen Bull, and I'm here on behalf of many of the residents of North Birch Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Street, and Beach Street, and residents of the Johnson Trust Apartments on Birch. I have lived in the area for over 44 years. My husband Jim and I purchased our present house on 60 Birch 15 years ago and have resided there for the last 12. Our children both went to CCI. Jim had an accounting practice in town. I worked at the hospital for many years and then had my own practice in town, and ultimately finished out my career at the Collingwood Sports Med Center with Dr. John Bowman. One of my sons is a captain of your fire department. So although not a local, I think I have landed immigrant status. Now, I am a relative newbie on the block. Some have lived in the same house for over 40 years. Some have inherited the home they grew up in, thus making their homes multi-generational. Some have invested heavily into bringing back their homes to their glory years and more. They have enhanced them beyond measure into stately homes with pride of ownership broadly stated. Over my 44 plus years of calling this area home, I have been witness to the phenomenal growth and on the other side of the coin, the growing pains that are associated with such growth over many years. Among these pains is the need for affordable housing. Only recently it came to my attention from one of my neighbors that the town is considering the future of the Johnson Trust Apartments, of which the history of its acquisition and partnership with one of our Rotary clubs is well known to you. Said contract has run out and the town must consider its options with this 3-lot property, estimated value of 1.5 million. Our concerns are many and justified. That the town has not been transparent in its matter of communicating this to the nearby residents in a timely manner. Yes, I did find it eventually on the town's website under affordable housing, but it was a dig. That the timelines are very short for the from the residents' perspective for this decision to be made. The town, on the other hand, has had several months, I think about 9, to plan this. On October 2nd, I held a meeting at my house of the residents of Birch, 2nd and Beach Streets, of which 17 people attended on very short notice. And I asked a member of council to please attend, and Keith was very generous in his time to come. As a landlord of this 9-unit complex, you have several options to consider of this R3 designated land. Farm its development out to a third party who would build affordable housing, repair the apartments and leave them as they stand, but said repairs which were to have been maintained as part of your partnership with one of the Rotary clubs has not been adequately maintained, resulting in their slide into shocking disrepair. 1 unit is condemned and uninhabited. Rebuild on the same footprint, a building that is much better construction and up to code that will fit in with the neighborhood in which it's located. On October 14th, I also attended a meeting at the Johnson Trust Apartments with the residents and with Keith Hall in attendance, at which time they were able to express their concerns about the condition of their 9 units and their future there. 2 of the residents have lived there each for over 20 years. That tells you a lot about the stability of this complex. They have as many common concerns with us, and they're very similar. So although you're coming from this from an altruistic, greater good perspective, I feel that it's imperative that anyone just take a deep breath, remove their rose-colored glasses, and acknowledge some really very real elephants in the room. 1, it is well-known fact that there have been a multitude of disturbances at this unit requiring police presence. There have been reports of illegal drug trafficking at the complex in one of the units. The same unit experienced a fire this summer, and the cause of which I'm not aware, but negligence was a factor. Said renter also has an unusual number of unneutered, spayed, and reproducing cats on the premises. Psychiatric and mental health issues are definitely more prevalent in affordable housing communities. The town of Collingwood and Simcoe County need to address the lack of access to mental health, psychiatric, and medical care for residents that need these services, as well as the addiction issues and their sequelae. I understand that access to mental health is even diminishing and centers are being closed down at present. Proper screening of applicants for affordable housing needs to be improved so that the most deserving people are prioritized and who abide by the basic laws of the land to safeguard the safety of the entire community in which it sits. You are proposing a new 3-story, 30-unit building. Presently, there is 1 2-story and 1 1-story building. The total of both buildings being 9 units, of which 1 is condemned. The present buildings blend in with the surrounding area and are surrounded by the cedar hedge. With the new proposed build, you realize how that would impact the neighborhood. No amount of fencing or trees would allow adequate privacy to the adjacent homes. It's already been mentioned about the traffic, noise, light pollution, and the violation of privacy such a development would cause. But also the use of emergency, police, and fire services and the resulting cost to the town would escalate. The resulting loss of green space this would cause. There really isn't a lot there now. The resulting precedent this would cause. The resulting destabilization of a quiet residential neighborhood. Let me tell you a true story. When we first moved here, we soon discovered that the house across from us, number 55 Birch, was the biggest crack house in Collingwood. As a new widow, I was subjected to almost daily police presence, street fights at 3 a.m., cars roaring in and out, doors slamming, obscene language, noise and visual disturbance, child and spousal abuse. It was not pretty. Then it was crack. Now it's meth and God knows what else. Picture this. Large, sleek limos appearing at all hours of the day and night, arriving to get their stash for the weekend before driving to their destinations. Some pretty unsavory characters lording around the house 24/7. My feeling of complete vulnerability and loss of safety anytime I stepped outside. Fear of reprisals if I asked them to be more considerate of the neighborhood and my need for sleep. I dreaded weekends when it was at its worst. Increased vandalism and theft. Many of my neighbors were afraid to go out after dark. No, this was not downtown Toronto. This is right here in Collingwood, 12 years ago. In short, I've been there. I have done that. I do not want to have to go through it again. No amount of promises from high-minded, well-meaning people can convince me otherwise. This could be fraught with potential disaster. Ask yourselves this. Would you want such a total invasion and destabilization of your neighborhood? Right next door, across from you, behind you, around you? Would you like car lights shining in your living room windows because of poor exit entrance planning? How about the light pollution from the parking area shining in your bedroom windows? Have you ever lived it or witnessed the repercussions in a decent old neighborhood on one of the most desirable tree streets in town? I don't think so. You probably know that Birch Street this past week was subjected to 2 home invasions in broad daylight while the residents were inside their homes. One of them emailed her regrets in being unable to attend the meeting. They lost thousands of dollars of items and their home was trashed. She was totally traumatized by this brutal invasion. I obtained the Affordable Housing Task Report on Thursday of last week, and 2 other people had it dropped off to their homes on Friday, Marlene Grant on Birch and Nellie Teekins, who lives in the apartments. It looks pretty impressive, all those numbers, flow charts, pie charts, statistics, all the cold hard data of your staff and consultants' recommendations and justifications. Nothing grassroots concretely meaningful to those of us who will be subjected to this potential disaster. There is talk in the document of increasing the footprint of the build by annexing other properties. So in other words, a toe in the door to something bigger, more disastrous. How would you like your home to be devalued on the market, yet still pay the same amount in taxes? Do you really want to become a landlord and have all the accompanying headaches that go with it?
Ms. Bull, I'm going to have to interrupt you. You've gone over your 5 minutes. If you can just wind it up very quickly for us, please.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to compare what this is here and the Johnson Apartments. I'll have to pass on that. The Johnson Apartments and the social housing at High and Second. In closing, I would ask that you owe it to those who have lived in the area to be more open, honest, and fair, and take a look at the big picture. You cannot change the nature of the neighborhood with one thing and expect it not to impact the neighborhood as a whole. I think that's kind of a Newton's law. For every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. Higher height is totally inappropriate for this setting. Better to have 2 two-story buildings than 1 3. As councillors, mayor, and deputy mayor, you swore an oath to safeguard, protect, and represent the community, all of the community. Is this your definition of protecting, representing, and safeguarding the community? To completely change the dynamics, threats to safety, noise, traffic, and light pollution just to meet your criteria for affordable housing? He stated that he looked upon this as an opportunity. I and others say, not so fast. This could be yours and ours worst nightmare. Please be considerate and respectful of the current status of the neighborhood as a whole. We have never had any chance to have any input into it, and we all found out about it by word of mouth. Let's make one thing very clear. We are not against affordable housing, or now I find out it's mixed housing, and the dire need it represents. I, now 12 years older than when the crack addicts and traffickers lived across from me, just don't want to be subjected to this ever again. I would like to recommend that in your report, it recommends a representative from the neighborhood to be on a future advisory committee. When will that happen? And if so, I would like to volunteer for that position. We would like to work with you, not against you. The solution has to be a win-win for all, not a win-lose, which is ultimately what's happening now and what you presented. Our neighborhood needs to be left intact, not ripped asunder and ruined, ruining the several generations it's taken to make what it is today. Please, you are our representatives. You owe it to us who voted for you to make the right decisions on our behalf, not to serve some higher mandate first, but our concerns first. I'd like to end by leaving you with this little ditty of the 5 Ds. D could be for destruction, D for devastation, D for degradation, D for destabilization, D for disaster on all sides. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bull. We certainly have your comments, and staff will take those into consideration. Sarah, do we have any other members of the public that would like to speak to this item?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. We do have 3 more individuals. The next one we will allow is Christine Radetz-Siscone.
Okay,
And my apologies if they're mispronounced.
We'll get Christine on board, and just a reminder to our callers that you have a 5-minute limit, and I'd ask you to stick with that, please. Do we have Christine on board?
Yes. Hi, I'm here. I'm Christine, and my husband Rick is with me as well.
And we are at 24 Beach Street. So the back of our property basically faces the Johnson Trust. We're not going to repeat many of the concerns in the spirit of keeping this short, but I just have one comment and then I'll pass it on to Christine. But we've heard at length how we need significantly more affordable housing. So it's hard for me to understand why we would use, or why the city would use, premium land, very valuable land, that it could sell at a significant profit and buy then quite larger parcels and build more affordable housing. It would seem, just on an investment basis, that the city of Collingwood would be better off selling that land for housing development, which would net a pretty penny. And then those monies could be taken to buy very large parcels and build quite a bit more affordable housing. Secondly, I would just say, it'd be important, I think, to see an overarching vision of where we're going here. Where is the city going to build and want to build affordable housing? And then how would this property fit in? It seems like it's just convenient because the city owns this, that we're looking at development in that area, versus saying, here's our vision, here's where housing will be built in these various areas, and then going from there. So I just didn't understand how that would fit. I'll turn it over to Christine now, who will finish off with our last few points.
Yeah, so we just wanted to sort of amplify what some of the previous people had said, Helen and also Marlene. And we have also witnessed altercations from our house in the backyard at the Johnson Trust Apartments this past summer. And we're really concerned about having a very tall building that would obstruct our view. We've renovated our property, and we would just like to be able to have a building that doesn't tower over our 2-story home. And additionally, I think we have real concerns about the management of an affordable housing complex and how people will, who will get to go in, and the concerns about safety. We have heard stories that were verified of drug use at the High Street apartments. And so we're really concerned about that. And we would like to have our voices heard and be part of the community, or the committee, sorry, going forward, so that the planning that's going to take place will also keep the neighborhood, the concerns of the neighborhood intact, and And so we all have a voice in this. We believe in affordable housing. We're just concerned about a large complex going in, creating a lot of noise, a lot of light pollution, and concerns about safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for your comments. Sarah, who's next?
Thank you, Worship. Gina Sherman will be our next speaker.
Yeah, Ms. Sherman
just
coming through.
I am trying.
Yes. Welcome, Ms. Sherman. We can hear you
now.
Yep, go ahead.
I've pushed unmute.
We can hear you, Ms. Sherman.
I have pushed unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You can, or you can? You can.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Dr. Gina Sherman. Okay, good. My name is Dr. Gina Sherman, and I live on Birch Street, also opposite the Johnson Trust Apartments. And I certainly am not going to repeat all the kinds of things that have already been mentioned because you're well aware of those. But first of all, I do appreciate the data and the information that you made available to me this morning or this afternoon. I wasn't aware of some of the facts that have been presented, and I appreciate knowing more about the situation. I also want to say that my main concern also is that I do not want a great tall apartment building towering over a nice residential area. I bought a house here and I've improved it. I've been here for 12 years. I've been in the area for over 30 years. I love the area and I would like to see it as close to possible as what it was like when I first moved in here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sherman. Sarah, who's next?
Thank you, Your Worship. We have Vanessa Purnell.
Hello.
Hello, Ms. Purnell. We can hear you.
Hi. I actually live in the Johnson Apartments. I've been here for 20 years. I've raised all my kids here. I got a neighbor that lives in one of the units in front of me. She's been here for 22 years. I'm just going to make this quick. Have you guys, like the apartment building aspect that you guys were thinking on doing? I am not in agreement with it at all, like, because it's an apartment building. Nobody wants to live in a box, and I get what you guys are doing to get low-income housing. One of the concerns is where are you going to put all of us? Like I myself, there's 5 in my household, and then I know another family that's got 3, but I'm got the largest family here. So like, where are you going to relocate everybody? That's one of the main things. 2 is, you guys have you ever even thought about maybe building townhouses here instead of an apartment building? You could get more units in here and it would still be respectable. And I think the neighbors would even be happy with that, because then it's not a big building and it wouldn't be, you know, privacy issues with anybody. We take pride of being here. We've really like it. It's very quiet. Yes, we have mishaps of a certain person that's in the back right now. But in all, we all of us get along. We're all happy. You've got everybody really stressed here because not knowing what's going on. And we just need more involvement. And we don't know if we're going to be out in a year or what's going on. So if you guys can keep us in the loop, that would be great.
We appreciate your comments, Ms. Parnell, and are receiving the report from our housing task force today. And if the motion is passed that's been proposed, we will be referring it to staff for reporting back and next steps. So there are no imminent plans at this point. And we are looking at what is the best way forward to address this issue in our community. And we certainly understand your situation. So thank you for your comments today. Sarah, is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak?
No, there is not, Your Worship, at this time.
Okay, thank you. So then I'll open the floor to council for questions or comments. Deputy Mayor Hall, go ahead. And then Councillor Doherty.
I don't have any questions, as I was part of the task force for the last 6 months. So I'd like to just make 2 comments. The comment would be one to the task force itself, and the second would be to the residents within our community. So the comment to the task force would be a simple thank you for the time, the effort, your expertise, your passion in trying to address an issue that is not only affecting Collingwood, but the region and quite frankly, the country. And if we don't, as a community, start to make some serious changes as it relates to the product, the availability from an attainable and an affordable perspective, it is going to have lasting consequences to the things that we truly cherish the most within our community, and quite frankly, the pillars that make the fabric and make it a desirable, sustainable place to live, work, and play, as the motto is used. The second that I would like to, second comment that I'd like to make is to the community as a whole, and I guess it's specifically the residents within the neighborhood. I did have an opportunity by invitation to attend a meeting at Helen Bowles' place, and then a follow-up meeting with residents at the Johnson Apartments through Vanessa Parnell. And I appreciate both of you speaking today, and I appreciate that opportunity to come in and meet and visit. I think, and I hope that I get this right when I say, and I reiterate, that we are at a starting point. I appreciate that there have been some concerns as it relates to where we arrived today, the communication in terms of the process, et cetera. But that comments that have been made as it relates to what a final product may look like, whether it be the expansion of the property, whether it be going up, whether it be creating density, et cetera, we are not at that stage. We are at a stage today where we have assumed both the ownership and the management of a property that needs our attention. And I think that Mrs. Parnell is very correct in the sense that it is a community within a community, and that we do owe our utmost care and attention in terms of making sure that we move forward in a way that is respectful of that. It's respectful of the fact that we've had residents living there for 22, 28 years respectively, et cetera. And that they are very much a part of a process because in fact it is their home that we're talking about. The second would be to the neighborhood, and I fully appreciate the concerns. The first speaker spoke of developments in Barrie and Aurelia, and I don't disagree with her in her observation that they are different types of developments. They are different projects in terms of the unit makeout, their location, et cetera. But we do have examples within our community that I think are good examples actually of infill that have worked in high density residential areas. And in fact, residential areas that are in transition. And when I met with the residents at Helen Bowles' place in Birch Street, I referenced properties over on Raglan Street and how that community as a whole has developed over maybe a 10 to 15 year period and is quite different from the community that was there within that time period. Or St. Paul Street, for example, where there have been a number of infill developments that have really worked well and have complemented the existing neighborhood, not taken away from it. And when I look at those, I think that it lays the framework and the foundation for to what Helen suggested when she commented that I refer to it as an opportunity. It is an opportunity. I think that for the residents of Johnson Apartments, for the neighborhood, There are better and higher uses for that particular property that would be respectful of the neighborhood, respectful of those who will eventually live there, and would complement the fabric of that neighborhood going forward. I'm not aware, and I'm speaking for myself, but I'm not aware of when the task force met that there were any conversations that were that specific to the property, for example, that weren't respectful, that didn't take into account the seriousness in terms of how we're going to potentially get from here to there, and be mindful that we do have people living within this community and that we need to be concerned about the well-being of all, while at the same time trying to address an incredibly difficult issue within the community, and that is the issue of affordable or attainable housing. When I met with residents at Birch Street, I started my comments by saying, I'm not here as your county representative to talk about social housing. The county is charged with looking after social housing. And yes, it's their developments at the corner of 2nd and High. And those units have been well received, but I also acknowledge that there are some challenges there and that they are being addressed. We're not looking to create a social housing development at the Birch Street, within the Birch Street neighborhood. We are looking to create new dwellings that will put in a small dent into the overall issue of attainable and affordable. And I think when we go back to the presentation that was given today, and we look at those within our community across all economic, whether it be a young entrepreneur, whether it be a PSW, whether it be a retiree on a fixed income, the challenges and the realities of those trying to live within our community today have never been greater from an economic standpoint. I'm living it. And I'll just end on this. And that is that I have commented to people that in the 25 years that I have lived in this community, I have never seen greater change than in the past 5 years. Some of those changes are a result of things that are happening locally, provincially, and more importantly, nationally. But I talk to people today and I say, you know, I am very thankful to the fact that I arrived in the community when I did, because the reality is I'm not sure I could actually afford to move to the community today. I'll just say that again. I'm thankful of when I moved to the community because I'm not sure that I could move to this community today. And I fit into that percentile of somebody who is making a reasonable income, et cetera. And that is a scary prospect. So this is one piece to a much, much larger puzzle. And I hope that the document and the framework and the recommendations that have been presented today through all of the hours of collective hard work through the task force will be embraced by this council, will be embraced by the community, and that not only will we finally recognize that we have a serious problem that affects all of us, but that we really need to look how each of these small pieces will create that puzzle and finally start to solve the problem that, quite frankly, has been exacerbated in the last 5 years, but has been with this community for decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Doherty.
Sorry about that. I lost you. Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I want to express my appreciation and also my admiration for this group and the effort that must have been expended to present a report with such depth and breadth. You've done a terrific job, and it's very thought-provoking and does give us some tangible look at what our steps forward might be. Because certainly before this group was formed, when I turned my own mind toward the problem of affordable living in Collingwood, I could see no solution whatsoever. So this is good. It's certainly some of the comments that we've heard from residents in the Birch Street area would say that it's not perfect, but it is a first stab at it. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. One was in the section where you talked about potential funding sources. One fund that you didn't mention that could be rich with possibilities is FCM's Green Municipal Fund. And I recently attended virtually their Sustainable Communities Conference and heard from several municipalities who are in process of or have completed affordable housing projects using a combination of grants and loans, low interest or zero interest loans from the Green Municipal Fund. So this is something that we should definitely keep in mind. Another area where I had hoped to see more discussion, and maybe there isn't any, but just generally, is there a role, a stronger role for the private sector? Or does this always have to fall on the shoulders of some level of government and more increasingly municipal government? And, you know, as an actionable thought, you did not allude to the notion of requiring or encouraging new commercial or redeveloped commercial to include a housing component. You know, we're seeing this more and more in dense municipalities like Toronto, even like Wasaga Beach, where new commercial goes up, automatically 2 stories, automatically second story is residential. Another thought that I had was that, you know, maybe one of the things that we collectively should be doing is appealing to the province to amend the Landlord Tenant Act to ensure that there is more power allocated to the landlord, because right now it would appear, in spite of what the act actually says, that the power lies primarily with the tenants, and thus we have the kind of NIMBYism that we hear almost every time such a development is proposed. And it is true. We need to be able to make tenants accountable and to give ourselves the power to evict when tenants are not being accountable. And then just one other comment, if I may, Your Worship, and that there is reference in the detailed report that was included in our agenda to allowing affordable housing, or at least facilitating affordable housing by fast tracking the applications and by taking a look at more permissive heights and more permissive design standards. And it just it seems to me that that kind of flies in the face of what our community has been telling us about livability and about people scaling our developments. And, you know, just generally, it seems to me that if we build new affordable housing that is compatible with the neighborhoods in which it is being built, that we are much less likely to hear from the surrounding neighbors objections about that development. At least, you know, that's one idea. And those are just my thoughts, and no need for an answer unless one is forthcoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty, and this will be going to staff, and so there'll be lots of opportunity for discussions around the recommendation and the impacts that it will have locally. I have Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Jeffrey. Go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had the pleasure of participating in the Affordable Housing Task Force, and I too wanted to thank these dedicated, caring, hardworking community members for all that they have done. Just outstanding work. I wanted to address a few points this afternoon. Firstly, I just wanted to emphasize that the town does not have responsibility over social housing. And several of the people who spoke this afternoon were worried about a social housing project on Birch Street. That, of course, is the County of Simcoe's responsibility, and they've built the project, as we know, at High and Second. Our look at affordable housing was for certain income levels. And just to clarify, the 2016 numbers were updated by Nick, who gave us the 2021 numbers. But the incomes that our group was considering housing for is between people earning between $36,000 and $51,600. And by my multiplication division abilities, that's people who are earning roughly between $17 an hour and $25 an hour. We're hoping through our work that we're creating a sustainable community in just every way. And we need people, we need people who are earning in these income levels to be able to afford housing in our community. And I took a minute this morning and I looked at that well-known site called Indeed.ca just to see in that income level, what kind of jobs right now are employers looking for in our town and immediately surrounding our town. And I'll just read out a couple. A meat cutter at a grocery store, a cashier, a window installer, a room attendant at a hotel, a diagnostic medical sonographer, that's someone who reads diagnostic imaging, a prep cook, and so many personal support workers. And those are the people who carry the back-breaking work in hospitals, long-term care homes, retirement homes, home care businesses, hospitals, also registered veterinarian technician. Wait, I have some more. Digital marketing coordinator, addiction and mental health counselors, even an architect. And lastly, for the town of Collingwood, we're looking for a full-time aquatics coordinator in that income bracket. So I want us to think about, as a council and as a community, who do we need in our community to have housing to make us have a sustainable community where all these services will be available to us that we need, whether it's someone who's cashing us out at a grocery store or a personal support worker. I also wanted to clarify that the concerns that we heard from the residents here today who are near the Johnson Trust Apartments are heard and heard loudly. But I also want to say we are so far away from knowing what the plan is for that property. I just want to emphasize there is no plan for 30 units. There is no plan for high rise. There's no plan for 3 stories. there is no plan whatsoever. And the recommendations of this task force were to engage the neighborhood in coming up with a plan. And once the plan is developed, the neighborhood still gets to participate big time through our planning process, because given the convoluted zoning on that site, it will need to be rezoned before development can occur. And what does that mean? It's going to mean public meetings under the Planning Act. It'll mean staff reports. It'll mean lots of opportunities to hear from the community, to look at whatever plan is developed. So please, I totally agree. And our task force has been so clear in saying whatever's developed on that property has to be compatible with the neighborhood. And to my mind, compatibility won't be high rise. It won't be privacy issues. It won't be worries about light pollution. It will be compatible. So I hope that we will move forward with the community with the recommendation of the task force to come up with a plan for that property that will be suitable for everyone. And as someone said here today, that even the residents in the neighborhood would be proud to move into. And that was all I wanted to say, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. And I really don't think there's enough thank yous for this task force and the work they did. There is no conceivable way our staff could have expedited the foundation of the information and the recommendations to finally move us forward in a much needed plan on how we're going to address housing in our community. And I know a lot of us have had a lot of great angst while we go through this process. We know we're already behind. And we know that we need to get going because we're losing every day that we're not putting a more affordable stock in our community. So I do that, thank you. And I would be pleased to move the recommendations. And I have, when it's appropriate, I have a comment on one of them that I would like to ask staff to consider when they're pursuing their information on the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mccloud.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions and a request as well. First off, I guess the request, which is that the 7 items be severed when we come to vote. And so my questions through you, Mr. Mayor, to I don't know who, perhaps a member of the committee. Did members of this committee go to neighbors of the buildings on Birch Street to discuss purchase of properties near these buildings?
I'll look to, Vice Chair Marg Scheben. Go ahead, Marg.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Mccloud. Something's gotten lost in translation here. The answer to your question is no. There is no plan on the property. We looked at the zoning of the property and surrounding properties and what opportunities might exist. There was no official outreach on the part of the committee to any neighbor to find out what could or couldn't happen. So there isn't a plan. There isn't a discussion about that. It was merely a decision or a recommendation. Should the property be renovated? Should it be retained by the town or sold? Or should it be redeveloped? And that is the recommendation that we made.
Thank you. Follow up, Councillor?
Thank you. It seems as though some of the people who were commenting earlier seemed very clear that there had been contact made with neighbors about purchasing their properties. So definitely something lost in translation somewhere. Did this committee look at, through you, Mr. Mayor, did at any point this committee look at rooming houses when it comes to zoning for the town? I know that this was rather a hot debate in the city of Toronto recently, very recently. And I wonder whether any consideration was given to similar recommendations that Toronto just dealt with. I'm not sure to whom to direct that, Mr. Mayor.
I'll direct that to Mr. Linton. Go ahead, Doug.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. we certainly discussed it at length in terms of the rooming house situation in Collingwood and the fact that we've recently lost a number of rooming houses. One of our previous members on the task force had in fact been a resident of these rooming houses and brought some great insight into our group in terms of how important they are within the continuum of the housing curve. And so we did discuss at length how we might be able to provide recommendations to support rooming house development more, but it's a little challenging. If I can find it right now, right as it is, we're simply asking for greater permissions to be considered with rooming house development. But it is certainly something that this task force discussed at length.
Thank you.
Thank you. A couple more, Mr. Mayor, and again, I'm not sure entirely to whom I should direct this, but did this committee talk to representatives of the county about the county taking over the Johnson Trust Apartments? And if so, what can you tell us on this council and indeed the public listening in about how those conversations went?
We'll take that. Vice Chair Scheben Edey.
Through you, Your Worship, no, we did not talk to them about taking over ownership of the property because we did not feel that that was the best recommendation for the community. We're not looking at social housing as being the priority. We are looking at affordable housing, workforce housing for our community, and that responsibility would fall to the municipality, not the county. Having said that, we did have a wonderful presentation from John Connell, who I believe is on this meeting, talking about the county's role in the housing continuum. So we're very well aware of the differences between municipal and county responsibilities. So in this case, the committee certainly felt that continued ownership by the municipality for the development of affordable housing, not to be confused with social housing, was the most appropriate path forward.
Thank you. And I'll just note that we do have John Connell and our Fona Zwier from the county who are listening in. And as indicated, the county is responsible for social housing. There is a 10-year housing plan at the county. And so it's good to see that they're attending. Follow up, Councillor.
Thank you. And just to be clear for anyone who hasn't gone right through the quite lengthy report, currently this particular building on Burt Street is being managed by whom? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
That might be a question for Clerk Almus. It was the Rotary Club under the Johnson Trust Agreement, but I think the trust has come to an end. So Clerk Almus.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have arrangements for the management with Bayshore Property Management.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. And is Bayshore Property Management managing any other buildings in Collingwood?
Sarah?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, through Your Worship, to Councillor Mccloud, 250 Erie Street.
And that's all?
Sarah?
Excuse me, sorry, Your Worship. That's all that I'm familiar with locally.
Thank you. And one of the people who had comments about the report mentioned a petition that had come to Town Hall. I must have been left off any of that communication somehow or other, but I haven't seen anything about that. So just to bring that to your attention.
Thank you. Clerk
And I think
Almus
that's it.
received that this morning, I think.
Thank you.
So we'll make sure that that gets distributed to all of council. All right, Councillor, are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, then I'm going to put the resolution on the floor. The resolution reads as follows. That council direct recommendations contained within the report be referred to staff for their review and evaluation within 3 months. And further, that council immediately authorize the following. Number 1, that council direct the recommendations regarding the future of the Johnson Trust Apartments be referred to staff to further investigate and develop an appropriate strategy for its redevelopment at the existing site with potential mixed-use commercial with a focus on market and affordable rental units, round bracket within the 30th to 60th tenant income decile. in bracket for council's consideration within 6 months. 2, the council directs staff to include the request to establish a reserve fund and land trust in the 2022 budget deliberations. 3, the council direct all recommendations pertaining to the official plan, round bracket OP, end bracket, and zoning bylaw, round bracket ZB, end bracket, be referred immediately to staff and consultants for review and evaluation in the new updates being considered by council. 4, the council support in principle the proposed vision with respect to any future initiatives that pertains to the UN Sustainability Goal number 11 and affordable housing. 5, the council include in the 2022 budget the hiring of an affordable housing planning specialist. 6, and further, the council immediately establish an affordable housing advisory committee to advise and assist where appropriate with the recommendations contained within this report, and the mandate of the task force be extended during the transition. And 7, and further, the council refer the other critical recommendations to staff for review and report back to council within 3 months on the timelines for consideration and implementation. Councillor Jeffrey had offered to move that. I will look for a seconder. Councillor Hamlin. And we've had a request to sever, so we will vote on each of the 7 recommendations separately. So calling recommendation number 1, Deputy Mayor, question or comment?
I just wanted to comment for the residents who are listening. The petition that was received today has been properly circulated via email. I think it was part of our slide deck for this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor. Seeing no other questions or comments, then I'm going to call the vote on the first item. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 2, the council directs staff to include the request to establish a reserve fund and land trust in the 2022 budget deliberations. Are there any questions or comments on that? Councillor Mccloud.
Thank you. I'm just cognizant of the fact that we are having our first look at the 2022 draft budget on Friday. Is it reasonable to pass a motion like this when I imagine that the budget is already headed to the printers?
I'll look to CAO Skinner on that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually believe that the treasurer is on the line here, so I'll have, I would like her to comment if she could. I do think that we won't be able to adjust the bottom lines, but we may be able to show this the amounts of this ask in context with the rest of the budget. Treasurer Finland.
Thank you, CAO Skinner. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Mccloud. We have included currently in the draft budget an amount for the Affordable Housing Task Force because we did understand that this was going to be coming quite shortly before we presented the first draft. But I do think it would be reasonable for us to be able to tell you, however, maybe it won't be included in the documents for Friday. We could understand at least what these asks or requests in terms of a tax rate increase would mean for 2022.
Follow up, Councillor.
Thank you. No.
Great. Are there any other questions or comments on item 2? Seeing none, and I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us to item 3. The council direct all recommendations pertaining to the official plan and zoning bylaw be referred immediately to staff and consultants for review and evaluation and the new updates being considered by council. Any questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us to item 4. The council support in principle the proposed vision with respect to any future initiatives that pertain to the UN goal, sustainability goal number 11 and affordable housing. Any questions or comments on that before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. 5, that council include in the 2022 budget the hiring of an affordable housing planning specialist. Councillor Mccloud, then Councillor Jeffrey, and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I would move an amendment to this that council include in the 2022 budget the consideration of, I don't want to be boxed in my budget deliberations, which begin on Friday, by anybody thinking that we've committed to something.
So I will look for a seconder later. I'm going to hear first from Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Doherty, and then I will come back and look for a seconder for your amendment. Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. And knowing the challenges with our budget and this ask is difficult in terms of adding to staff, I'm wondering if in the contemplation, staff could also consider identifying a point person within existing staff. We have a point person for heritage, if there could be a point person for affordable housing, and provide funds for training the key department persons with the other money, so that we don't create a silo of skill set within our corporation, but rather flatten and provide the skill set to the entire corporation, because this is a big deal, and I think to put it into a silo would be problematic. So I don't know as I need to do an amendment to the request, but if I do, I'll ask the clerk to tell me that I should ask for that to also be considered.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to look to Clerk Almost for some direction on that. Whether that can be a request of the staff or should be put forward as an amendment once we've dealt with Councillor Mccloud's amendment.
Thank you, Worship. I would suggest looking at an alternative point person arrangement should be an amendment as well.
All right, thank you, Clerk Almost. So Councillor Jeffrey, I'll come back to you and don't let me forget. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. My comment is generally along the lines of Councillor Jeffries. And that is to say, based on the wording of this item right now, are we boxed into a full-time affordable housing planning specialist? Or does that give us latitude to discuss during budget deliberations some other iteration of that role? So be it point person among existing staff, or be it a contract position as opposed to a full-time equivalent within the organization. So again, I'm just wondering if there's some way that we can modify the wording of that particular point.
Well, I'll come back to you after, maybe when we're in our discussions on Councillor Jeffrey's amendment. So we have an amendment proposed by Councillor Mccloud that we change the wording to consider. We have an amendment that's going to be proposed by Councillor Jeffrey, looking at whether this person can be, I guess, acquired through existing staff and made designated person for the affordable housing issue. And then we'll go, I guess, then if either of those don't suit you, then you can bring your own amendment at that point. So I'll come back to you then, Councillor Doherty. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to add some background to why that recommendation is in the report concerning the affordable housing specialist. I can say that the committee had a lot of discussion around that. In fact, this read as a affordable housing department and felt that was maybe too big of an ask for council at this time, and eventually narrow the scope down to one person. And the reason that one person would be considered for the position as opposed to spreading out the role among various planning people is one thing we have realized in our committee of 9 is that it has taken 9 of us with 3 different subcommittees trying to understand and coming to an understanding of, firstly, the financial incentives that are out there, and the things that Jack spoke about are, even contain words that I'm sure, it took me a while to figure out what they meant. It's complicated. All of the planning recommendations are, can be implemented, but many of them have a lot of parts around them that will need a lot of work to bring them into fruition. The property recommendations probably alone is a full-time job. If we're actually going to bring forward any of the properties, whether it's the Johnson Trust or other properties as discussed in the report, it's acquiring the property, appraisals of property, not the least of which is getting into coordinating with the public and coming up with plans for a property. And working through all the various legal, can I put the structures that will be needed. One of the task force meetings, Mr. Fox, who's an expert in this, gave quite an interesting discussion about all the different ways and entities that can be set up to deal with this kind of housing. And he recommended that the goals of the community be set first, and then from there we look at what kind of entity can best be used. These jobs, I think, are well beyond the abilities of, not the abilities, but it would be best if they could be put into the hands of one person who can bring all this knowledge together and make sure that the goals are met. Having said all that, really it should be staff giving us some advice about, if they disagree, I guess, on the, on this, if they think that all these jobs should be spread out over the entire workforce of the planning department, so be it. So I would be happy to second Councillor Mccloud's suggestion that council include in the 2022 budget the consideration of the hiring of affordable housing planning specialist, which would seem to me to cover off all possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I guess it should be clear for council and the public that really what we're recommending in this recommendation is that staff look at this position and come back with a recommendation on it in the 2022 budgeting process. So we're not committing to this job or this position at this time. So just so that's clear for everyone. Are there any other questions or comments on this item? Deputy Mayor Hall.
I appreciate the fact that people want to be able to further digest the report. They want an opportunity to perhaps take some of the recommendations and put it in the context of the budget that we're looking to pass in the next month or so. That said, I think that the report speaks for itself, but the history of what this community has tried to do and hasn't been able to achieve to date perhaps speaks louder than the report that's actually been tabled today. Affordable housing, attainable housing, social housing. The reality is we're talking about people, and we're talking about creating a climate where people can feel safe and secure, that they feel economically in a place that they can continue to grow, and that the community as a whole will continue to grow. I mean, that goes back to, the original report, Vision 2020. It was part of the second Vision 2020 report. It has been a part of further discussions. This is something that's been an ongoing discussion now for 20 plus years within our community. And I think that by instead passing point number 5 today, it's sending a clear statement to ourselves, to staff, and to the greater community as a whole, that we recognize the conversations that we've been having for 20 years that have been encapsulated in the report that we've received today, and that we're serious about moving forward. I think that, in doing so, it's not handcuffing further discussions. It is simply stating today that we recognize that there is an issue. It's an issue that we have elevated, and it's an issue that we want to tackle head on. And I would encourage the my colleagues today would in fact actually support this, and that we really get serious about putting the resources in terms of staff time, the financial resources in terms of being able to pay for the position and having the resources in place, and dovetailing into the next one that we will be speaking to in a moment, the fact that there will be the adequate resources to complement and assist and drive forward an ongoing housing task force to ensure that we are not only paying lip service to this issue today, but we are actually putting our feet to the road, our money to the road, and moving forward with supporting this in an actionable way that says, to the task force and to the greater community, we hear you, we understand you, and we recognize the severity of the issue, and it's time to step up. And I think this is one of the most actionable of items in terms of putting our time, money, and resources in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Are there any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey, and then we'll get
Sorry,
into
Mayor Saunderson, I just wanted to clarify that by voting in Councillor Mccloud's amendment, we're not precluding the addition of the consideration of an alternative within the budget scenario as well, correct?
Yes, so the first amendment, Councillor Jeffrey, is to add the word consider to the existing. So consider the hiring of an affordable housing planning specialist. And then your amendment, I think, will deal with that issue that you're addressing now about whether it needs to be a new hire or that there's an existing person that could be dedicated to that, if I understand your amendment. So we're going to deal first, if that's okay with you, I'm going to deal first with Councillor Mccloud's amendment, and then I will come back to you for yours. And so I've got Councillor Mccloud's amendment, which adds consider hiring of an affordable housing specialist, planning specialist. That has been seconded by Councillor Hamlin. And Councillor Doherty, do you have something to say to this particular amendment?
Yes, thank you. I think, unless I am misinterpreting Councillor Jeffrey's intent, it seems to me that we could also include the notion of hiring an outside specialist on a contract basis within the general concept of considering alternatives to a permanent full-time equivalent.
And that will be part of Councillor Jeffrey's amendment. Right now, we've got the amendment to add the word considering, and I will come back to Councillor Jeffrey's. So first dealing with one amendment at a time. Okay, thank you. So we've had good discussion. We're looking at adding the word. Councillor Comey, you've been quiet so far. Do you have something to say on this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So through you, I suppose my first question would be, as we move ahead with the vote, I just want to be clear, perhaps through you to Treasurer Quinlan, I just want to be clear, I won't have to look for it in the budget. We will have an opportunity to see a line item called out specifically, because my concern is, as we circle back to this through hours and hours of budget deliberation, that it would somehow get lost. So I would like to clarify through you, Mr. Mayor, we will see an actual line item that'll give us an opportunity to vote on. Is that correct?
Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Comey. We can certainly include it that way as a separate item to discuss so that we can see exactly what the tax rate impact would be, if that makes it simpler.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Yeah, I suppose my point is I don't want it to somehow get discarded and we didn't notice because it was blended with some other thing that can so easily happen when you're sort of in the middle of these deliberations. And then, Mr. Mayor, I'll just offer the following comment that's very similar to what the Deputy Mayor was touching on. After this council declared a climate emergency, they agreed about the importance to hire a climate change specialist for all the very same reasons that were described in this presentation, that there were enormous grant opportunities to pursue, that this was something we had committed to as a council of great urgency and importance. when this council came on board and agreed that traffic calming and active transportation was a priority, we heard from Director Slama the need to hire more engineering specialists so they could conduct their own warrants. And I believe it was just last year's budget deliberations where we said, absolutely, this makes sense. This qualifies as a job. So I really just see this as a continuation of those very same commitments that, as mentioned by Councillor Hamlin, is not straightforward. It may not well be a couple additional bullet points on a job description. It is complicated and worthy of someone's full-time endeavor, in my opinion. But I just saw how they tied into other issues. So thank you for the opportunity to share those comments.
Thank you for those. And certainly this vote is pushing it forward to the budget discussion. So I think that will be part of the discussion when we get to that. So then this motion right now is to add the word consider hiring to the existing wording on line 5. It's moved by Councillor Mccloud, seconded by Councillor Hamlin. All in favor? Opposed? So noted. Councillor Jeffrey, I'm going to come back to you for some wording on your amendment.
Okay, so and further that that alternatives be considered. The clerk can word this better. And further that alternatives be considered regarding a point person identified within the planning department and or a contractual arrangement, and that training dollars be allocated to provide cross-departmental education for critical progress on the Affordable Housing Task Force initiatives.
All right, do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Berman. Any questions or comments on this item, Council, before I call a vote?
May I speak first, Mayor Sanders?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Councillor.
Just really quickly, just with respect to Councillor Comey's comments in the climate change specialist, part of that job and why, in my opinion, I supported it is because there was also the grant writing opportunity that went with, I believe, a half job of that person. And that grant writing would also be available to us in affordable housing, because also part of the affordable housing commitments through sustainable goal number 11 are the climate change matters and the GHG commitments that we are making through that commitment. So I think the rest of the amendment is self-explanatory.
Thank you for those comments. Any other questions or comments, Council, before I call the vote on the second amendment? Seeing none, all in favor? And opposed? And the motion passes. So now we're back to the main motion as amended. We've had good discussion, so I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? And opposed? So noted. And this brings us to item 6. And further, the council immediately establish an Affordable Housing Advisory Committee to advise and assist where appropriate with the recommendations contained within this report, and the mandate of the task force be extended during the transition. Any questions or comments on this item, Council? Councillor Mccloud.
Thank you. I am not going to support this particular piece. I think that I'm not against an Affordable Housing Advisory Committee being created. However, I think it might be premature, especially in light of the 2 of the items of these 7 that we are likely, one of which we have passed and one of which we are about to vote on, about staff having a look at what the needs are and what the realities of the situation is, or rather what the realities of the situation are. And so I think that I am open to those arguments at a later date, but I think that this particular piece is premature. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Hamlin and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to speak on that point in a few regards. Firstly, there's no budget implications involved in having an Affordable Housing Advisory Committee take up the mantle during a transition period. And secondly, it would be a shame, in my view, if we let all of the expertise that the individuals on the task force have garnered over the last 8 or 7 months go, because it is irreplaceable, in my view, what these members now know, what they've learned, and what they can still share as we move to a situation where perhaps we won't need an advisory task force, but right now it will be my recommendation, and I will vote in support of this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. My comments would be similar to those of Councillor Hamlin. I think we only have to look at the significance and the depth of the report that we saw today to see the value of such a committee on an ongoing basis. And I'm very strongly supportive of this particular point.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this item before I call a vote? We're voting on item 6. All in favor? Opposed? Duly noted. And that is carried. And this brings us to item 7 and further. The council will refer the other critical recommendations to staff for review and report back to council within 3 months on the timelines for consideration and implementation. Are there any questions or comments on this item, council? Seeing none, then I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. I don't know if we have any more of our task force members with us, but thank you very much for your hard work again. And you will certainly be hearing more as we move forward. And that brings us to item 5. We're running late, so I think what I might suggest, perhaps CEO Skinner, you could maybe highlight any changes from the last update for us.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that there's only been one major change in the last week. A number of things have been progressing well. However, the biggest change is that a number of new building permits were approved in the past week. Many of those were related to the Royal Windsor development and 4 other units that received building permits. So we had over 80 of the remaining single development units worth of water that were exempted that are now moving toward construction in the community. And I can give you all a more fulsome update next week if that suits you. Thank you.
It does. Thank you very much. And that is good news. CEO Skinner, council, are there any questions or comments on that? Seeing none, then we'll go on to the consent agenda, item 6. And the resolution reads that council herein received the general consent agenda, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda item is that of the author and are not verified or approved as being correct. And the one item on the consent agenda today, 6.1, Collingwood Youth Center 2022 budget letter of request. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Madigan. So I'll call the vote to receive it, and then I will look for anyone who would like to address the one item. All in favor of receiving the item? That is carried. Thank you very much. Is there anyone who would like to pull the one item? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the letter points out, our town has, over the last 3 years, provided $25,000 a year in funding to the Collingwood Youth Center, which plays a very important role in our community, helping youth build skills in job readiness, employment support, entrepreneurship, arts, culture, sport, recreation, social, and emotional growth. So I very much would like to ask for support in moving this request to our budget discussions. And so that would be my motion.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Comey. So we're moving the $25,000 request to our upcoming budget discussions. Are there any other questions or comments before I call the vote? Councillor Mccloud.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the treasurer. Is this already included in our budget that's coming out on our draft budget that's coming out on Friday?
Mr. Quinlan?
Through you,
Treasurer
your worship.
Quinlan?
Sorry.
Go ahead,
Through you,
Treasurer.
your worship.
Yeah.
To Councillor Mccloud, yes, it is. We've already got the request included at this point.
Thank you. So do we need to vote on this then?
Well, I think it's good to have the direction, so I will call the vote on it.
Okay.
All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And this brings us to staff reports. So we're at 525 or 425. I'm just going to look to CAO in terms of the items here. We're probably not going to get these done in 35 minutes. So I'm wondering what would be the proposal then for moving ahead on this.
Your worship, I think that the council and non-union compensation review is an item that we have a consultant available for today. Okay. And that is a significant item in the budget and would be one that I would prioritize to be presented. The policing item, I believe to be a very quick update. I think that the decision is immensely straightforward, although of course the questions from council may indicate I haven't thought of everything. And the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry update, item 7.1, is not pressing. We'd be happy to do the presentation at another time. However, it is quite nice that it is exactly 365 days today from the date of the release of the report. So we would just want to draw your attention for certain of you and the council and the community that we have that report there for you to see and published.
All right, well then let's start with item 7.4, the non-union and council compensation review, since we have our consultant with us today, and then we'll progress from there. Go ahead, Manager McQuaig.
And members of the committee, we are just waiting for our consultant to sign on. But while we do that, I'm just going to give the committee a brief overview of the project, just as a refresher. So a comprehensive compensation review for non-union positions in council was initiated in December of 2019. Prior to that, the last compensation and job evaluation plan for non-union positions was completed in 2013. And the last full review of council remuneration was conducted in 2009. In 2019, the 1/3 tax-free exemption for elected officials was eliminated and council remuneration adjusted to retain the same net pay as 2018. An RFP was initiated in July of 2019 to undertake this project, and Gallagher Benefit Services Canada was selected as the successful proponent. Gallagher Benefit Services is a Canadian consulting firm that focuses on strategic compensation issues and design with in-depth expertise in job evaluation and pay equity. So Jane Mizanski, Gallagher's lead consultant on the project, has over 30 years of experience in the field of HR and compensation program design and delivery in the public and not-for-profit sectors. She has worked on numerous job evaluation, custom market, and pay equity reviews with significant experience in the municipal and private sector. So the project was comprised of several components. One was a review of the compensation structure for non-union positions, including assessing external equity and total compensation, using a comparison of salaries and benefits for the town's positions with those of similar positions at comparable municipalities, and any HR policies that may be affected by the recommendations of the consultant's report, such as benefits administration, vacation allotment, and overtime time in lieu, for example, will be brought forward at a later date. Another component was a pay equity maintenance review, as well as a review of the non-union job evaluation plan and recommended maintenance approaches. So another significant piece of this review was a council compensation review, and Executive Director Peg is going to speak to that particular component.
Go ahead, Executive Director.
Thank you, Your Worship. So through you to members of council, as mentioned by Manager McQuaig, Gallagher Benefit Services did also undertake a council compensation review to assess the competitiveness of remuneration and related practices as it applies to members of council. The consultant has reviewed the council compensation package and has provided observations on the market data relative to the town's practices. These observations are shared in the consultant's report and will also receive highlights of those today in the presentation. In addition, the consultant has provided considerations for council compensation. These considerations would enhance council compensation to aid in areas such as attracting municipal candidates who reflect the town's constituency, responsibilities, the time commitments, and accountabilities of the position. Should council wish for staff to further explore these considerations, staff would be happy to under council's direction. Although recommendations for council composition elements, such as the total number of council members in part or full-time status, were out of scope for the current compensation review, staff are aware that council may wish to explore these components further. And if desired, under council direction, staff would be happy to report back on opportunities to explore these options and the recommended timelines. Thank you, and back to you, Manager McQuaig.
Thank you. So to the committee, Jane delivered a presentation at the December 9th, 2019 SIC meeting to kick off the project. And she's back today to present the final reports for both the non-union and the council compensation reviews and recommendations to the committee. So I'd like to welcome Jane, who I think is on the line
and trying to figure out my computer here. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So Melissa, you've indicated 2019, we started the project. That seems like decades ago. And then you said I have over 30 years experience. So I really feel old as part of all of this introduction to the project. So do we have someone that's going to be working the slides? Thank you. Okay. So we're going to start off with the staff review first, and then I'll walk through the council report as well following this one. So if you want to go to the next slide. So as the introduction was, we were engaged by the town of Collingwood to undertake this review for the non-union staff or the exempt group of employees, and it's to look at the total compensation so that we make sure that we're looking for internal equity, pay equity compliance, and then also taking a look at some of your salary administration policies and benefits to make sure that you're aligned in the bigger picture for best practices. Scope of the review, we touched on job evaluation. Well, we didn't touch on it. We did an in-depth analysis of job evaluation, external market review to make sure that you're externally competitive. Pay equity is legislation that is still required. So we did our risk analysis in terms of your compliance to that legislation. Then we wrap up all of those elements and develop a pay structure, recommended pay structure for the organization. Next slide. So as Melissa indicated, the last review was in 2013. So it's going on 10 years, almost 10 years, and a lot has changed in the marketplace. But internally, you had job evaluation, pay equity compliance, and a market assessment. So very similar to this review that we've completed this time around. Over those ensuing years, you did have job evaluation ongoing when you had new jobs or changed jobs. So we were using the same tool to evaluate internal equity and placing these new or changed jobs into the grid. Salary grid itself was updated on a regular basis, taking into consideration things like the CPI or other market indicators that might include what are your other comparators doing, what is a union group doing if you have a union group, these kinds of things, or salary surveys as well. So in terms of the environment that was leading up to the review, you've had some current recruitment and retention challenges already where you have tried to recruit for employees or candidates, and either you're not getting the applicants or they are declining your offer because pay has been indicated as a consideration where they're saying it's just not what they were looking for. You are anticipating some more more vacancies that are coming up due to some retirements and some critical jobs. There's been not just in the town of Collingwood, but also seasonal jobs and labor jobs that are becoming increasingly more difficult to recruit for and fill across the entire sector. And that speaks to the next point, which talks about the municipal labor market. And it's extremely competitive right now. The municipal sector is, even prior to the pandemic, was starting to experience what they call the silver tsunami, where all the baby boomers were starting to retire. So it was this big bubble of people that were leaving the organization. So all municipalities are scrambling and competing for the same skills, particularly for senior leadership type roles, where the pool of candidates is not quite as robust as you would like to have. So that's been one area that you've been competing with. And there's also a few niche positions, hot skill type positions in the building inspection. Planning is becoming a hard to fill position as well. Finance, some of the finance jobs as well. And then in addition to that, we now have, as a result of the pandemic, although there's not a lot of conclusive recommendations or projections as to how work will change ongoing, but we do see now employees are feeling a little bit more empowered to start looking at other opportunities that they might not have considered, because there's this new mobility aspect that they have, where if they have a spouse, then maybe their spouse can now work remotely. So there's opportunities for them to move around the organization or around the sector as well across the province. So it's even more critical now, because you have these employees that are, maybe they originally weren't looking at moving on, but now, number one, they might be headhunted or being enticed to go to another municipality. So it's important to make sure that your pay is competitive and that your practices within the organization are fair and equitable, and that you're respecting the treatment of employees as well, to make sure that they feel valued to the organization, so that you can retain and motivate these employees that you do have. Next slide. Whenever we approach our compensation studies with any of our clients, these are kind of our guiding principles that we include in all aspects of our reviews. So the first one is all about compensation. So it's about fairness. It's that felt fair pay, where we want to make sure employees feel that when they look at the colleague beside them, do they feel that they're being paid relative to the skills and responsibilities that their job requires? How do we do that? We do it through job evaluation. We evaluate a position, we come up with a numerical value for that job as a proxy of its value relative to other positions. And so that's how we develop the internal equity. Compliance. The pay equity legislation is still alive and well. There are review officers that are going out and doing audits of organizations. So you always have to be prepared for having an audit done, in addition to it's good governance to make sure that you're in compliance with the legislation. So it's an analysis of male and female positions, not jobs of the equal jobs, but jobs of equal value. And we'll talk a little bit more about the pay equity analysis. Then the third pillar is competitiveness, making sure that you are competitive. It doesn't mean necessarily that you have to pay at the top of the marketplace, but definitely you want to pay competitive to your marketplace, and defining your market as well, so that you can address the general employee population, as well as making sure that you're not becoming vulnerable for some of the market sensitive positions. As I said, the inspection staff, the planning staff, the finance groups, some of the engineering areas are also becoming competitive as well. And then the very last pillar, which is usually the area that council is most interested in, is affordability. It would be really nice as a consultant to come into an organization and say, hey, yeah, I think I can make a recommendation that everybody gets 20% increase. It's not practical, not necessary, and we have to be mindful of the ability to pay as well. So it's definitely a pillar that we have in the municipal sector. Next slide. Developing a pay program. These are the basic steps that we follow through, a little bit of what I've just indicated already, but our foundation piece is job information. If we don't start off with current and robust job information, then the whole thing starts to fall apart, because that's where we start with our internal equity and then we do the pay equity. So there's a couple of ways of collecting job information. You can do it through job descriptions or job profiles or job qualification statements or job information questionnaires. The town was using both job descriptions and questionnaires at one point in time, but in order to simplify that process, which was one of the objectives of the review, we opted to just tweaking the job descriptions themselves to making sure that they were robust enough. And then we've landed on the job descriptions as our base foundation. Then we do job evaluation. A couple ways you can do it. You can do it with an HR team if you have enough capacity. You can do it through a job evaluation committee, which is often the approach that is used in a unionized environment. Or you can use an external consultant or any combination thereof to evaluate all the positions. Pay equity, as I said, pay equity is about comparing female jobs to the same value male jobs, and make sure that they are of equal pay. And the value of jobs as required by the legislation is to focus on skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. The factors that you would include underneath each one of those can be customized according to the municipality or according to the organization. But these four big buckets of job characteristics have to be considered as part of the legislation. The market review, it's really a process about analyzing external data to make sure that we're evaluating positions and aligning jobs based on what your market comparators are also paying. You have to consider internal equity, but as well as external equity. And there's different things that we would take into consideration to define your comparator group. Then we, as I said, we take all of these pieces, it's kind of an accumulative process, and then we develop the salary structure so that you can manage your compensation on a go-forward basis. Then there's ongoing maintenance. So as I said, if you have new jobs coming into the organization, you have to have your structure so that you can receive those jobs and find an internally equitable placement of those jobs. Or if jobs change, if qualifications increase or the scope of someone's position increases, then you have to be able to incorporate them into your existing structure. So it's an ongoing process. Next slide. So the approach that we used for the town of Collingwood is, as I indicated, we used job descriptions and they were all updated. There was an extensive process to make sure that they were current and that they reflected what the responsibilities, expectations, and the qualifications of the positions were all as of current date. I evaluated, or my team evaluated, all of the positions, and we developed a banding structure. In terms of banding structure, it means the pay bands that we would have where we could align the jobs of similar value determined through their job evaluation points. We prepared a preliminary ladder chart, and the ladder chart is simply those groupings of jobs. Where do they all group together? In a top to bottom or bottom to top hierarchy. And that ladder chart was reviewed by department heads, and then we subsequently shared it with employees. The purpose of sharing it with employees was to engage them in the process and to let them know how their position was coming out, where it was being banded with other roles in the organization. That also gave the employees an opportunity to say, I think maybe in hindsight, let's look at my job description, let's have a conversation, because there's some things that you just can't always get through a job description. Sometimes you require a conversation to get the nuances of a role, certain things that just don't get picked up. So we had 26 of these meetings with the employees. And so as a result of those meetings, we did make a few more finer refinements to the band placement of jobs. So some positions changed their band placement. So once we landed on that hierarchy, that ladder chart, we completed the pay equity analysis, and it was based on 2021 job rates. Then we also had the market comparators pardon me, that we had established in consultation with the department heads, and we gave consideration to what was used in the past. Who are you currently losing employees to? We wanted to make sure that we covered off similar services. Some of the metrics that we could look at is population, households, growth. We take into consideration the impact of seasonal influx, or your seasonal influx of constituents that might influence the demand on your municipal services. Next slide. So in terms of internal equity and pay equity, we came up with the 16 pay bands. That was the new structure that was developed. Previously, you had 22 bands, so it was a much more spread out structure. Plus, with those 22 bands, you had some part-time and seasonal student type positions in kind of a secondary banding structure labeled A to D. So we've incorporated all of those positions now into this new structure. We did the pay equity analysis, and there's two approaches to pay equity, not to go into a lot of detail around how you do pay equity, but it's we use the job to job, which is the preferred method, and your first approach in terms of the legislation. It outlines the process that you have to go through. So job to job means that you look for a male comparator within a pay band. And if you have a male and a female position, then you match the salary rate. If you don't have a male position within that pay band to compare to, then we use what's called the proportional value, which is a regression line where we would plot all of the male data, salary and job evaluation points to create a male pay line. We would then take the female position that has no male comparator, take their job evaluation points, bring them up to the line, and that tells us whether there's a pay equity gap or not. As a result of doing this analysis, we did identify 3 positions that had gaps to their male comparator positions to ensure that you were male, ensure that you were compliant with the legislation. And when we developed the new proposed salary grid, it incorporates these pay equity gaps. So it's not like there's a separate payment that's required in this regard. Next slide. For the external market review, we had these municipal organizations that were identified through consultation for the town. It does include some larger ones. It included the County of Simcoe, but it also has a couple on the smaller side as well. So it was deemed to be a fairly rounded picture of the comparator organizations. Next slide. Pardon me. In terms of how did we do the market review, so we ask our competitors to provide us with their salary information, org charts, any other compensation information that we were looking for in terms of the benefits and some of the other paid time off provisions as well. But for the job matching, we take a look at the jobs. A lot of the competitors or comparator organizations that we had are current clients or previous clients, so we have some experience working with their data as well. So we do the job matching based on what we know that the jobs are. We take a look at qualifications, we look at experience potentially, and then the organizational hierarchy as well. So it's making sure that you're trying to match as close as possible. Nothing's ever going to be an exact match, but as close as possible, we do the job matches. We would also eliminate any outliers. So if we had out of 10 comparators or 10 observations, most of them are around, say, a $50 or $50,000 mark, and then we have one that's at $95,000. We would exclude that comparator, even though the job on its face value might look like an appropriate match. There is something unique about that position or that incumbent. It could also be incumbent driven as an accommodation or something special, a special project or something that has driven the salary up, or on the other end, driven a salary down. So we would exclude those outliers from the analysis. We did end up in using this process. We had 72 of 123 jobs that we did find statistical matches, meaning we had at least 4 observations out of the comparator group, which is pretty good. 59% of the jobs have got the coverage. So we can be reasonably confident in the analysis that it's giving us a good reading on your market competitiveness. On aggregate, when we add up all the pluses and minuses between each of the individual jobs of all those 72 job matches, the table on the slide there is indicating that at the 50th percentile, which is your target pay market, you're just a little bit below the target pay policy of P50. However, having said that, at the individual job levels, there's some that are significantly off market, either over or under market, and then others are a little closer to the market. So it's got some deviations within there. But in general, minus 3.4% gap. So you're 3.4% a little bit above the marketplace on an annual basis, and 1.9%, so basically rate at market on an hourly basis. The reason that there's a difference between the annual statistic and the hourly statistic is not all of the market comparators have the same hours of work that your organization has for each of the different positions. So you might be paying a position on the basis of 1820 or a 35-hour work week. Your comparators might be paying a 37.5-hour work week or a 40-hour work week, which will impact the difference between the hourly and the annual salary rates. Okay, next slide. So it's just a graphic to try and say, I mean, it's not an exact science to say you're competitive. So we have a scale. So we generally say if you're within plus or minus 5%, you're at market. We can't fine tune the numbers that closely. So we would say you're pretty well at market if that's your overall statistic. If you're in the area of plus or minus 10%, you're competitive. So it still means that you might want to keep an eye on some of those jobs that are in the yellow zone. If you are over market, if you're under market, you might want to keep an eye on them because they could be potentially vulnerable. But for the most part, you're reasonably competitive. And then any jobs that fall into the red zone, which is plus greater than 10% if you have a gap. So if you're paying more than the market by 10%, that means that you potentially overvalued your position. Or overcompensated your position relative to its value in the organization. So we would take a look at job evaluation to make sure it's placed in the right band if that's the situation. And we did have a couple where we've kind of corrected that. And then on the other side of the scale, if you are 10% below market, that is a significant risk. Those would be jobs where you would be watching those positions to make sure that you're not going to potentially lose that incumbent, particularly if it's a really hard to fill or a hot skill, high demand position. Okay, next slide. The proposed salary grid, because of the span of time that we had between when we started the project and developed the recommended pay grid, we had 2020 market data that we used. So we contacted all of the comparators and we said, how much did you increase your 2021 grid by? And then we took the average of that and applied it to the 2020 pay grid that we created. So the average was 0.8% through all of that research. We've maintained 5-step pay band that you currently have in place. It's approximately 5% between each step from minimum to the job rate, the top rate. And then the salary grid also, as I said, we took into consideration what was the pay equity requirement and making sure that the job rates were established so that there was no additional pay equity payout required. As a result of the analysis, 2 of the 17 pay bands have been adjusted now to the market P50, and 3 bands have been adjusted just to make sure that we have some structure that minimizes compression. You don't want anything in the range of anything less than 5% from one job rate to another job rate, because it's just not a big enough difference between the bands to allow for and account for the additional scope of responsibilities that are presumably, as you evaluate jobs going up in the band. Also, you want to make sure if you have an employee position in one band and they report to a supervisor in the next band, you want to make sure that there's enough of a gap there to account for the supervisory responsibilities that are required. Okay. Next slide. I keep wanting to click. So having done the analysis and wrapped it all up and prepared the proposed 2021 pay structure, this is what the recommendations are, the what's being tabled before council for consideration. So maintaining the five-step grid for each pay band, approximately 5% between steps. So there's no change there. It is inclusive of the pay equity consideration. So now you can say, and you will have the analysis available should you be audited, but you can say that you are pay equity compliant as of 2021. And then all of the job rates are aligned to the target pay policy of P50. And we've given some consideration to some of those market sensitive positions as well to make sure that we're not undervaluing them or placing them into a band that's not appropriate just because they could be vulnerable, particularly if they are single incumbent positions as well. Recommendation is to make it effective January 1st, 2022, although it's a 2021 grid, and how we have not included any COLA increases for this because that's a separate discussion. But in terms of implementing everyone into this new grid, we took the incumbents' current job rate in 2021, we placed them into the new 2021 grid at their step that's closest to what they're currently making, but not less than, because the intent is to never decline someone's salary. If you did, then we have what's called red circling, or as we're proposing, a green circling option as well. Next slide. This last piece is really on a go forward basis. We're recommending that the salary grid continue to be adjusted on an annual basis, or at least give consideration to adjusting it annually, taking into account what are your comparators doing, what are the published salary projections, and what is the CPI. Continue to evaluate new and changed jobs using the new job evaluation plan that we have implemented. And then conduct periodic market reviews every 3 to 5 years so that you can make sure that you are staying within your market pay policy. And then to test for pay equity compliance. Our recommendation to our clients is really to test for pay equity on an annual basis for an organization of this size. You could probably do it maybe biannually if you don't have a lot of internal activity or organizational changes going on, but generally I wouldn't let it lapse for more than 2 years. Okay. And that concludes that part. Okay.
Thank you for that, Ms. Zansky. I hope I said that right.
Perfect.
Manager McQuaig, anything to add to that?
Not at this point, Your Worship. I'm wondering if Jane, did you want to proceed into the council remuneration report as well?
I can. Okay.
Okay, and then we'll open it up to public comments. Councillor Mccloud, go ahead.
Thank you. The Corporate and Community Services meeting is scheduled to begin in 3 minutes. And I don't think that we can give this fair discussion, and certainly not the second half of this report with these kind of time constraints. I hope that I can move the beginning of the CNCS committee to 5:30. But I don't think that I'm comfortable with moving it more than that. Therefore, and I'd like to be able to give a fulsome conversation to both of these reports. I know that there's certainly at least one councillor who's had things to say about remuneration in the past, and no doubt they will want to have things to say today. So I'm not quite sure what to do now, but I will provide those for your information.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. So we will aim for the 5:30, and we'll see how far we get on this presentation now. So I'm mindful of your time commitments and the corporate and community services. So thank you, Councillor. All right. So with that being said, then Ms. Mazansky, I'll pass it back to you for the comments on the council remuneration.
Okay. All right. We can go right to the next slide. So similar to the staff review, this was a compensation review or a remuneration review to look at the elected officials' compensation relative to the comparator organizations. And we wanted to make sure, if we could, as best as possible, consider that the compensation reflects roles and responsibilities, recognizes time commitments, fair and equitable, so that we can make sure that we are attracting a diverse pool of candidates to serve in the community, in the elected officials or public service realm, and that it's within a framework that's financially sustainable. The challenge with doing council compensation is, unlike the staff review where we have job descriptions, we have a structure and a framework in which we can evaluate positions. We know what the qualifications are, and we have some standards to work against. We don't have that same kind of opportunity when we're doing council remuneration. So we really have to rely on what are our comparator organizations remunerating for these positions, and try and use that as a benchmark in which to make recommendations going forward. Next slide. We had 11 comparator organizations. The County of Simcoe was not included in the review for the elected officials. We did have the Niagara-on-the-Lake. We solicited them for information, but for whatever reasons, they participated in the staff review, but they did not participate in the council review. So that's why there's a disconnect between the two groups of employees or groups of comparators. Next slide. So in order to collect information for the review, we did develop a survey questionnaire. We sent it out to the municipal comparators. We asked them for some information on base remuneration, what kind of per diems were being paid, what were the conditions under which the per diems were paid, any other allowable expenses, cash allowances of any shape, sort, and the opportunity to participate in pension and benefit programs that are available to the exempt staff or the non-union staff. We tabulated all of those responses to provide the basis for our analysis. And we also have included in the analysis, because it is a diverse group of comparator organizations, we've included the profiles of all of the different groupings, just to see if there really was any impact in terms of having the large municipal versus the smaller municipal or like sized organizations in the review. And that is included in the report. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So this is the summary chart, and it does capture just the compensation part of it, the base remuneration. So in terms of reading the chart, if you have, as I said, the competitive zone is plus or minus 10%. And if you're at plus or minus 5%, then it's basically you are considered to be market competitive. If there's a bracket around the differential number, the percent number, it means that the town is higher than the market median. And then if there's a plus sign, it means that you are lower than the market median or a gap. So when we go across all comparators, the size of the council is the same across all employee group or all comparator groups. And then we have the all comparator group, we have the population pretty well, very, very close to what the town of Collingwood's population, my apologies, population is, so 21,000, give or take. And then even considering across the different slices of the information, 20,000, it seems to be the predominant number there. So reasonably representative when you look at population only as the indicator for size and comparability. On the mayor's salary, the town is currently paying $45,169, and across all of the different comparator groups, it is generally competitive, with the exception of when you have, I noticed I've put brackets around it. I guess I shouldn't have put brackets. It's a plus 9.5% only when we look at all comparators, and that is basically the influence of the city of Kingston and Barrie on the market data, because they are the larger ones. They are the ones that have a full-time mayor and recognized as such in their pay. But for all of the other data points for the mayor, if we exclude those larger city status positions, competitive at the 45,000, like slightly above that. On the deputy mayor's side, it's pretty consistent across all of the different data slices, in part because I believe Barrie and Kingston did not have a deputy mayor position. So there's no influence from those comparators in this regard. And we're roughly just shy of 10% above the market on average at the P50th percentile. And then for the counselor position across all comparator groups, again, you're still in the competitive zone, regardless of how we look at the different comparator organizations. So you're within that plus 5-6% range. So deemed to be at market or competitive across the board, with the exception of the only one that's got the biggest gap to market is all comparators for the mayor's position. Next slide. So we took at the, so that was basically the first point, is summarizing the chart that I just indicated, so that the remuneration is only slightly below the market median, really, when you include all of the comparators for the mayor's salary. Another way of looking at the data is to say what's the difference between the councillor's salary to the mayor's salary, the councillor's salary to deputy mayor, and then the deputy mayor to the mayor's salary. So we looked at those gaps as well, or those percentages, and how are the other municipalities looking at it. So when we look at the mayor as a percentage of the deputy mayor, across the different organizations, it ranges between 69% to 50% for the rest of the profiles. Your town of Collingwood is currently, that differential between the mayor and deputy mayor is 41%. So it's a tighter alignment between those two salaries than what the marketplace is generally doing. They're making a bigger distinction in those salaries. The mayor's salary to councillor salary, again, it ranges from a high of 105% to an average of 84%. So the town, again, it's tighter. So mayor to councillor is a much tighter range spread, if we want to use that type of a term, or the vertical differential between the jobs. So you're at 77, just shy of 78% on that gap. Next slide. And then for the deputy mayor to the councillor salary, it is across all of the different comparators, it's pretty tightly clustered around the 22% mark. Yeah, the town differential is a bit higher than that at 26%. So there's this is the only place where you are actually making a bigger distinction than what your marketplace pays. So, yeah, what your marketplace is paying. So there's, but I wouldn't say that it's significantly off market. If we look at the representation of the size of council, it's pretty static, as we showed on the chart. It's 9 members of council is the median number, and the ratio of council, just as a statistic, it's not to indicate anything particularly profound, but it's really just another way of looking at it. Is if we take the number of council members to the population census, it's pretty equal there as well, even when we do include the city of Kingston and Barrie as well. Next slide. Other observations on the other data that we collected, I have to make a note. There is an error there that 104 for the per diem should actually be $100 as the median market. When I was reviewing this before the presentation, I picked up on that error. My apologies. So per diems are typically paid when you're attending a conference or training, workshops, anything along that line, which is aligned to what the municipal comparators are doing, that in your specific employee group, comparator group, but also as a broader public sector across the municipal sector, that tends to be the practice. Your per diem is a little bit high. It's 141. I wouldn't say that's necessarily, an aha moment where we should do anything about it. I think it's not too bad off the marketplace. The per kilometer rate, most comparator organizations and across the municipal sector, they do tend to align to the CRA. And that is what the town is doing as well. So there's no difference there. And then access to insured health and dental benefits, where it is available, it's typically paid, the premiums are typically paid for by the municipality, and that's in keeping with what the municipality, the town is currently doing. There are some municipalities that may pay, or request that the member pays 50% of the premiums, but I would say it trends towards more of 100% coverage where it is offered. Okay, next slide. So again, for consideration, if we look just at the statistics and the analysis of the comparator organizations, you're within that market median range. So no additional market adjustments to any of the 3 different positions. We would recommend the same as we would for the exempt group, where in order to maintain that competitive position, that you continue to apply your adjustments annually as are deemed appropriate for the non-union group. And then the expenses and other benefits that are being offered by the town, our general observation is that you are competitive, that you're within the reasonable and standard practices of the other municipal organizations in the comparator group and across the sector. So no recommended changes there. However, having said that, if we could go to the next slide. And as I mentioned at the outset, it's difficult to capture the other nuances of an elected official position in terms of how do you account for skills that you want to try to attract, how do you account for the diversity of candidates that you are looking for, the time commitment, which can be anywhere from overly burdensome to some people may be able to manage their own time that they're committing to the position on their own. So there's no really solid way of or framework that we can do that. But in consideration of some of these different challenges, there are some other things that we are recommending for consideration. And the first one would be there is the mayor's salary that is a little bit off market, pushing close to that 10% threshold that we like to keep our eye on. And so there might be an opportunity for council to consider moving the mayor's salary to the 49,000, the market median job rate of all comparator groups, so 49,458. We're recommending that if you do that, you would maintain the deputy mayor's salary because that gives you a 54% differential to the mayor's salary, which is a little bit more aligned to what the market was suggesting. And then increasing the councillor salary by 5%. And this is, just a recommended percentage number. I don't have any high math behind it. It's really just a reasonableness test. And so if you adjust it by 5%, it brings it to 26,712, and it keeps it closer to that deputy mayor's salary, aligned with how your market comparators are also making that distinction between keeping those two close, but making the differential to the mayor position a little bit broader. In terms of anything else to attract or help counter some of the hurdles that other candidates or potential candidates might have and why they would not put their name forward. So not everything is about money, because sometimes if you are working a full-time job and then you get another remuneration for being an elected official, then it can start affecting your tax. Not that we don't want to all pay our taxes, but it could affect the tax situation. So there might be other ways that are more meaningful to attract some of the candidates, or at least alleviate some of the hurdles for other candidates. This could include covering the cost of daycare expenses, or it could be elder care expenses potentially for members of council for all the time that it's required to sit on the council meetings and to attend the council and committee meetings. Another opportunity would be to explore, instead of an insured benefit program, some employees or candidates, again, they might already be fully employed. They might have an insured health benefit program through another employer. So having this benefit is of no value to them. But they might be attracted by having a health spending account to help counter some of the additional things that could crop up in that realm of their life or their health. So that might be another way of maximizing the opportunity that you're offering insured benefits, but not in a packaged way. So these are being offered as suggestions to explore. There's nothing definitive in terms of the health spending account or daycare expenses. And I think that's the last slide.
All right, thank you, Jane, for that. I'm going to look to Clerk Gomes to see if there's anyone from the public that would like to comment on the presentation on the salary grid and on council remuneration.
Thank you, Your Worship. Any of the attendees participating in today's meeting, please press the raise your hand feature should you wish to address the standing committee on this item. There is no one interested at this time to speak to this report.
Right, we're at a quarter after, and I don't think we're going to get to the vote on this issue tonight. I appreciate we got through the presentation, but I'm going to look to you, Clerk Gomes. I think the other two items we won't get to are the, and so the timing would be, could we do the Q3 financials and the budget session on Friday? And then what do we do with the balance of this agenda?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe the compensation discussion is also important for the budget deliberations. So we're recommending the compensation discussion and vote on the matter be considered at that meeting as well, that's set up for Friday. So if we remove the compensation discussion and the third quarter financial report to that meeting, the following items we can add to the special SIC agenda that's set up to talk about the procedural bylaw items that's scheduled for November the 10th.
All right. Well, then let's do that. We will, Chair Mccloud is looking to convene the corporate and community services at 5:30. So we will break now, and I guess I will just recess this meeting. Would that be the appropriate as opposed to an adjournment, since we'll be coming back to some of these items on Friday, or what would be the best process there, Clerk Gomes?
Thank you, Your Worship. Since we're setting them up as special meetings, it would be ideal to have this meeting actually adjourn.
All right. So that being the case, then I'm going to look for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. I'm doing this in a vacuum here. So I'm going to adjourn this meeting then. And so I've got the motion on the floor from Councillor Jeffrey. All in favor? We are adjourned, and we will pick up this discussion on Friday in the budget session. And I thank you, Ms. Masansky, for your work. And we'll see the corporate and community services people at 5:30 and see everyone else on Friday. So thank you.